Welcome everybody to the Techmeme Ride Home Experience for November 19th, 2022. We are actually live today, fucking live.
It's amazing.
It is amazing. And we have a special guest in studio, which is even weirder to say since we're never in studio. And in fact, we're in Brian's office, but we have Anil Dash here.
Hello.
An old friend joining us. I feel like this is long overdue. It's been a couple weeks since we talked.
It's long overdue for Anil to be here. It's long overdue since you and I haven't spoken and done a show in 3 weeks.
Yes. And I feel like it's been 6 years since 3 weeks ago.
In internet
it's been a
time.
long 3 weeks.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, actually, I have an idea for a way in.
Okay, great.
Okay. When I have these two frames in my life in terms of the tech industry, right? So I started writing the book in 2012. By the time it came out in 2018, when I started in 2012, people were like, oh, you're going to explain how the internet changed our lives. By the time it came out, 2018, it was,
it already had.
You're going to explain how it ruined our lives. Okay. 5 years ago, I started this podcast, and lots of things have changed, but what I'm thinking about is from 2012 to now, and especially from 2018 to now.
Okay, so 10 years ago.
The tech industry, things have changed, new players on the scene, all sorts of stuff, but basically kind of the narrative was kind of the same for the last decade.
Yeah, the industry matured.
If I had told you a year ago today that by the end of this year, crypto would have blown up, the big tech companies would all be laying off people, the 10-year bull run of VC investing was good, and oh, by the way, Twitter may or may not make it to the end of the year.
On a knife's edge.
It's weird how much of the narrative that the tech industry has been in for a decade, all of a sudden this year is chaos.
Yeah, it's back up in the air.
Yeah. Did I mention crypto was at its height a year ago right now? Yeah.
So I think a year ago, I don't know.
It was November.
But if you just said 5 years ago that's going to happen in the next 5 years,
yeah,
I think 100% I would have said yes. And you know, not that I have some particular impressions. I mean, you both know this space as well as anybody, but I think it's untenable the path it's on, right? It's just sort of the sense of like, you know, too big to fail or whatever you want to call it. Like there's a part where you can only get so big and grasp so much, and also you can only push people so far. And this is an interesting thing because I think people want to map it to, you know, where they are on the political spectrum and all those kinds of things. But the interesting thing is no matter how you identify what you think of yourself as politically, you feel like they pushed you too far in the last 5 years. And that's a really interesting thing because take crypto, even the most pro-crypto folks were like, well, this is a reaction to big tech's overreach, right?
Yeah.
Right? And then the most anti-crypto folks were like, well, this is a reaction to big tech's overreach. So that's a really, like that to me was like very clear. I remember writing about it like 2016, 2017, like on Medium, which also feels like of that moment, and saying like, they're going to call this entire industry the new robber barons. And I remember saying that very distinctly, and I remember very distinctly people being like, you're out of your mind. And I wasn't the only one. Like I'm talking about this as a voice of like, not I'm claiming I knew this, but I think everybody who looked at the pattern was like, yeah, this is not a thing where you can keep pushing this hard, this fast, for this long without some pushback.
Let me give you another one then, Chris. I'll tee you up. You've heard me say over the last 2 years that the whole generation of companies that were coming up when I started this show, they all went out the door. I'm talking about the Ubers, the Airbnbs, the whomever, and I said...
So when you say out the door, you mean...
Went public, had their liquidity moments, got acquired, etc. So like there's also, I feel like this is a generational change or like a cohort change where all of the big up-and-comers, I mean, obviously they haven't won or they're not dead, but you know.
But they're established.
They're established. And so I also feel like, and for a time it felt like the crypto companies were gonna step into this, be the next generation, but now it's like, wow, like.
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple things have happened. You know, one is that the pattern has been set in terms of what a tech success looks like. And so, especially from a VC, perspective, they tend to be pattern matchers and looking for things that they've seen before. So crypto, and I think SBF is such a great example of this, had all the trappings of the next proto Zuckerberg, and the difference was that the fundamentals weren't there, and the use cases weren't there for the technology, and the thing that it sought to replace. It is a different set of concerns and considerations than what Facebook actually offered the world, which was an entirely new way. I mean, for essentially, dogs to sniff each other's butts. And so the behavior, was there, but the mediums and the access to it wasn't. Whereas when you try to replace the financial industry with just digitization, you end up having to add all the controls that make the financial system trustworthy. And they explicitly rejected all those things.
Yeah, it's in tension with the culture of what they were trying to build.
Right. So the irony, and actually I would take some issue with what you said about crypto being kind of I think against the techno class or whatever. It was a response to the financialization in the financial market and the financial crash in 2008 that crypto was set up against.
Yeah, except for the fact that they've been framing themselves as Web3 is going to right the wrongs.
Sure, but I guess what I'm saying is it's both, right? So on the one hand, it was we feel screwed by the financial system that existed.
Yeah.
We are going to take tech away from the tech people and build a new and different system, and somehow we're going to be smarter than, and sort of literally pull an Enron, smarter than everybody else, and create a better new system.
Well, I think there's a really interesting thing of this sort of generation. I do think there are generations. I think, and maybe the defining trait of a new generation is everybody has to relearn all the mistakes the last generation just figured out, right? And that particular cohort you talk about of Uber, Airbnb, these things were different in kind from the sort of Web 2 ones before them, right? Because if you look at, actually great examples are YouTube, Twitter, Facebook to some degree, there was actually technical innovation, right? YouTube, at that scale, streaming video, it was cost prohibitive for them to do it, let alone for others to do it. But certainly before that, it was cost prohibitive. But the idea of doing video at that scale, literally there were, Wired magazine had the internet is going to break, right? It's it can't be done. And so it's important to remember the context of this is a technological breakthrough. Obviously, at the same moment, iPhone comes out, right? And that is inarguably a game changer. It's just
the technological breakthrough was mobile being real.
Right. Yeah. Now take, and this is not trying to be intentionally reductive or dismissive, take the technology of Airbnb as a text box, right? What you're putting up is some photos and a description and a payment system, right? And so it's not hard to scale the technical underpinnings of Airbnb. The social underpinnings, the reckoning with the different regulations in every area, what the laws are for housing, all that kind of stuff. That's a really hard problem, and I'm not diminishing that at all. But it was not primarily a technical innovation.
Yeah, I think the thing that's important to think about is that the first wave that Brian was talking about was purely digital, largely accessed through a web browser.
Yeah.
And so you had some device that connected to the internet, and then there was an experience that was delivered to you, whether that was in a large format or a small format. Whereas Airbnb, Uber, that class was much more about how the internet then touched and reached into the real world. And then when we saw Obama get elected, then we saw it actually reach into politics.
Yeah.
And I think what, as Andreessen talked about software eating the world, I think we've just continued to see what that actually looks like as it plays out. And the financialization piece is the piece that has happened most recently that was, on the one hand, the most exciting because so many people were getting access to wealth and money that they'd never seen before. But then we suddenly realized not only how much of a house of cards that was, but how the previous system that had been set up over literally generations and hundreds of years had a number of sort of stopgaps in it, so that as you think about those, we have them in California where there's the highway, and then we have runaway vehicles, and then they have the pullover for big granite dumps, whatever. Crypto didn't have that. Crypto was just whatever. It's a free for all. It's totally libertarian. And as we've seen it crash, all those controls now suddenly make a lot more sense.
So I want to challenge that narrative a little bit, because I see with Uber...
I just want to say that you're talking about crypto in the past tense. I wanted to point that out.
That is an interesting change.
Go ahead.
So I think there's a thing to look at with Uber, which is it is part of the same hyper-financialization pattern that we could ascribe to the market crash in 08, 09, but also...
Sorry, I want to unpack that a little bit, because as you're saying hyper-financialization, I'm also thinking about capital and capitalization. And what I think is interesting also is to think about two effects of efficiency. One is the internet's ability to route over a network, and be robust. And that sort of capitalization in the sense that there's all this latent supply, which are vehicles that are not being used and potential drivers. And then there's the financialization, which is to exploit those resources for perhaps other people's benefit.
Yeah. So this is where it goes. I think a lot of people bought into there are all these vehicles just sitting around. Clearly there are, right? But conflating that with the pool of labor of people who drive for a living was I think in retrospect a very intentional sleight of hand, right? These are two different things. There was a story that you were going to pick somebody up in the backseat of your car on the way to work, and these apps would be helping coordinate that. That is not what happened right from the beginning, right? And I think there's a big thing. So as we record this,
say more about that. What do you mean?
Well, I'll give you a concrete example. As we record this, we're in New York City. We're not too far from Jackson Heights, a neighborhood in Queens, predominantly South Asian and Chinese. About a third of families who live in that neighborhood get some of their household income from driving.
A third,
right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's a fundamental.
When you say driving, are you specifically talking about rideshare?
So it's mostly. Well, if you go back 15 years, it was mostly taxis.
Okay.
And livery, taxis.
Well, delivery is
right, exactly.
Yeah.
So that was the landscape. Mm-hmm. And then what we had, and again, I can speak most specifically to New York. I think this happened in every place that Uber and Lyft went, but here in New York, the back of the bus would have an ad that said, "Make $5,000 a month driving for Uber," right? And that's aimed at a cab driver. That is not aimed at everybody else who's stuck in traffic. So that already is sort of a shift in the rhetoric of there's an unused resource versus we're trying to capture a market that already exists and turn it into something that is, fuel for our app.
And I would argue that at least I bought into early on that, it would be one of those things where you pick up 4 people on the way into the city. Like when you were saying it would organize these things that are unorganized.
Right, the ad hoc things would become systematic.
Right, exactly. So sort of the crowd sort of whatever thing of the Web 2 ethos, I thought was going to manifest itself.
Same, and I think we had that same optimism at the beginning of Web 2 and all those kinds of things. But
because when you first hear about Airbnb, renting out your house, it feels like the couch surfing thing.
Yes.
As opposed to what it's become is this professionalized sort of industry.
And a capture of housing inventory that is not being used for anything but that.
Right.
I mean, I was going to say, so it's hard at this point, and I want us to be very, very careful about the degree to which we kind of move into, I don't want to say mis or disinformation or sort of ascribing too much intentionality when there wasn't any, because you're talking about this sort of, and as we're talking about it, this untapped market of cars that are just sort of lying dormant, which anybody can see. You walk down the street and they're just parked there. They're not being used. They're an underutilized resource. Then if you're talking about housing stock, it would be hard for me, although maybe some people had this impression at the time, for Airbnb to say, there's this amazing housing stock, which are the houses that people own, but they're just not always occupying them, so therefore we should turn those into quasi-hotels or proto-hotels, but not call them that, and do some regulatory arbitrage. Right. That feels far too kind of telling a story.
It's a retroactive narrative. Yeah. No, I think that's right. And also, but I think there's
so I think that it's very important though, and I don't want to be either too Pollyannish or too optimistic or positive or techno-positive, but there was an opportunity that many of us did see where it seemed like we could actually make a lot of things more positive, more productive, and useful, and inclusive.
But getting to
in a way that they weren't before.
Right. Getting to the what was the intent, which may or may not matter. Right. The impact probably matters even more than the intent. But one of the things is people who own multiple houses enough that they can rent one of them out are not trying to make a couple bucks on Airbnb. Right, so there was a mismatch of the rhetoric or the narrative of what would be
By
real.
a couple bucks, do you mean they wanted more than a couple bucks?
No, they're I own a couple houses because I'm so rich. I own a couple houses.
Okay, and so
I'm not trying to do anything to merchandise one of my homes. Right, that's strangers
as opposed to the room above the garage that maybe you rent out,
which is the thing we imagined in our heads when we heard about it, right? And then to the point about Uber, why I point out those ads on the buses is. absolutely correct criticism of the taxi regime in New York was these immigrant families, from Bangladesh would have to get together, or wherever the families are from, pool their resources as a community, help somebody pay off, sign up for $1 million mortgage on a taxi medallion, and the whole community's in hock to this thing, and that guy, it's usually a guy, is going to go drive this thing and try and pay that off and pay back his community. And it is unfair, and it was limited, and it is a racket, and that's absolutely true. And he's like, okay, guaranteed $5,000 a month, I'm going to go and do it and sign up. And what we know now, retroactively, is Uber would game the algorithm to give that guy more rides in his first month, so he'd make $5,000, and be like, great. And then month 2, he's not making that. And they're like, oh, well, you just need to upgrade to Uber X. By the way, there's 3 or 4 cars you can choose from to do that. That's not a mortgage you can get on your own, because you already went all in on the medallion that you've got. But we'll give you the money. However, it'll come out of your money from Uber off the top, and we'll help you get that car. Right, and that is just company store, right? That is just like worker exploitation from a coal mine from 150 years ago.
So let me reframe it again, because we've stumbled onto talking about 2 specific cases. Let me reframe in a different way about how it feels like there's a generational shift or turnover happening in tech right now. For 10 years, and you could argue going back to the 90s with a blip in between, a young kid coming out of college, engineer, whatever, she goes to the Valley, she goes to New York, you find a company that, you're hire number 10 or whatever, you work your ass off, and hopefully 8 years from now,
This was the narrative we were told, and you would cash out and it'd be good.
Coming out of college right now, you're looking at layoffs at all of the big companies, and, a third thing that my fund started last October when there were $50 million pre-seeds every day, coming across my transom. So you're a founder now, where for the last 5 years, all you had to do was have a decent idea and, be in the right place, have the right team.
Yeah, know the right people.
So reframing it in terms of that, the young people and the industry, things are different.
100%.
All of a sudden than they've been for the last
But I mean, isn't this also, and I agree with you, the reset has come largely because of macro conditions that have changed, and largely that the cost of capital and money now is much higher. And so I don't know what it was in the 2000s, the interest rate, but as the interest rate has increased, and as the cost of that capital has also increased, now capital has to become a lot more efficient. So in other words, there was a lot of money that was so inexpensive for VCs to get, and then put towards not great ideas, because the chance that any one of those not great ideas could turn into something amazing and then pay off all the rest is no longer the case or the condition.
Well, I think it may
be that way for the next 2 to 3 years.
I think there's also the changing political winds, right? Because if we sort of carry through the Uber story,
yes,
this is true. Uber's never made money, right? It's never been profitable.
Almost just did, but okay.
Right. But sure. Thus far, right?
But still on that weird EBITDA.
Sure. Right. Yeah. It's not fully made up EBITDA, but it's community based.
Well, it's not as bad as we work.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So we have that part, and yet if you're the investors who are on the cap table, they made a lot of money, and from a sort of policy standpoint, a regulatory standpoint, they were just front-running regulation, and sort of say if you get far enough ahead of regulation and you make a big enough bet, you can take a lot of wins off the table before the hammer comes down. Yeah. Arguably, the same thing happened in crypto. Like the crypto fund at Andreessen is the biggest returning fund that they've ever had in history, and arguably one of the biggest returning funds in the history of venture capital.
Double their best fund that they had previously.
And I don't think anybody's arguing they created a ton of value or a ton of great jobs for people. Right? And that is a circumstance where rightfully regulation comes in, policy comes in, political winds shift, and people feel like, hey, that's not fair, that's not the way things ought to work.
Yeah.
There ought to be some point where when you're getting this much wealth for yourself, you've created some value for society and done something that has this merit. And the mismatch there is the biggest reason that capital is more expensive right now. Because people can see it. Like even if you're not fluent in all the macroeconomic terms or whatever, you're like, hey, a lot of people got screwed, and those guys got real rich, and some large part of what they did may not even be legal within our current regulatory
But I guess, so what I'm saying though is if there is an opportunity to take advantage of a system where money is very cheap, then people will find ways to serve themselves. And I think if you look at what happened with the pandemic and the amount of stimulus relief that was out there and the amount of fraud that was out there, the decision was made and the calculus was made and the risk was accepted that it made sense to get more money out there because of the fact that people were not working or they were staying at home or whatever it was. So to support people, just flood the money with this resource and we'll sort it out after the fact, which seems analogous or similar to what you're describing as happening in the VC world, where again, it was like, let's put a bunch of money out there and then the regulations come back afterwards to say, okay, well actually we had a bunch of new things that were developed and grown. And I guess my question is is it then your position, and I think it is a little bit important maybe for you to reveal what I feel like is sort of, maybe it would be useful to hear your, maybe it's condemnation of Uber in general, because I feel like you have such strong positions on it, and I want to separate Uber from the innovation of like rideshare and ride hailing, and the fact that the taxi industry was stagnant
and corrupt.
Absolutely. And so I'm not saying, I don't want to like make a clear judgment about Uber in absolute terms, but in terms of a technological innovation, live streaming video generally has enabled lots of other people to get online and to make a living and to do different things like that, whether it's OnlyFans or Twitch.
Yep.
And so Uber additionally has brought technology to bear to the market.
I mean, there's a lot of wins, right? There is inarguably, black passengers in America having access to rides and cars they would not have access to hailing on the street, right? I mean, there are inarguable social goods. I think that the question, though, when we talk about like the large scale economic impact and in my mind also how do you create a fair system, a just system around that, a regulatory framework around that? I want to really interrogate the intent was to do this, because I think the narrative stayed, the intent was to deal with the inefficiency of all these cars that are not being used. That narrative stayed the public rhetoric for a long time after we knew they were gaming the algorithm to sort of, in my mind, trick these drivers into signing up for a deal that they would never win on.
I guess the thing that I'm struggling with to some degree is to the degree that both can be true, where there is a desire to sort of reform the broader situation, let's say in this case of transportation, and also that the methods by which these companies grow or figure out growth strategies not only veer into the realm of being, I don't want to say evil, but essentially they have an advantage because they know how the system runs and they can put their finger on the scale of the algorithm to move in one direction or another in a way that is opaque to those who are being controlled by the algorithms.
Yeah.
So whether it's content moderation or whether it's who gets the Uber trip sent to their app, all of those things continue to be opaque to the people whose lives are ultimately controlled or manipulated by those systems. And that I guess there's a question as to what degree or how could regulation make some of those things more clear, and then how does that create a feedback loop that perhaps allows them to feel more enfranchised or more in control of how their lives actually unfold.
I think a useful framing is to look at other models that have succeeded at scale, right? So if we imagine, if somebody had the idea for we ought to be able to share rides in 2004 or 5, Chris, you and I would have been there saying, let's make an open spec for listing car availability.
They tried to do that in Austin.
Right.
Didn't work out so well.
Right. But that would have been the thing. And it's not science fiction to imagine that Google would have indexed everybody publishing their car availability.
Google even tried to do that.
Right.
I mean, I was on the Uber developer platform team, and they indexed both Uber and Lyft, and we didn't want to be commoditized.
Right. And so that's the thing, and I think the lagging problem is policymakers can't understand or have not historically understood that that's a thing where they can apply pressure to balance a market, to make it more competitive.
Or to change the way in which the market is competitive.
Right.
Yes.
And for that example, it's had that kind of thing succeeded to that point, Uber and Lyft would have been more competitive.
But to be fair, though, GPS is the thing that the government standardized and provided access to.
And
that
is platform.
Exactly.
It's an enabling platform.
That's
absolutely.
Right. And so that's what enabled that competition to occur.
But we could imagine taxi availability having the same model as GPS.
I mean, if they were providing the medallions, then they could have also said, here's how we're going to have an auction place.
So that's where I get to, how do you have regulation and market pressure from industry to push them to say, why aren't medallions an API with real-time data.
Yeah, but so I feel like the big change and the big problem, though, is, well, I'm going to speak outside of my realm here, but it feels like politics and the government have largely not been as focused on being metrics-driven in the way that a lot of Silicon Valley companies prefer to be. So Uber can look, quarter over quarter about what is growing and what is not, and they will do thousands of experiments to learn how to move things, forward.
Right.
And they'll have lots of different cohorts.
Well, you have to have
test cases. Hold on.
Yeah.
Whereas the government, at least as I understand it, largely has to do things that are similar or the same for all citizens at once. So they don't have the ability to do A, B, Z, Q, Y, X cohorts of test subjects. The way that we handle that is through federalism and through the state system, but those are far too large to learn fast enough at a low enough cost to actually make the types of changes that we'd like to see. That we rely on companies to basically do instead.
Yeah. So, at a literal level, there are A/B tests going on at federal and state and local governments, but it is not at the same degree and not to the same pervasiveness.
Well, because there's also like the privacy concerns from citizens against the government.
Well, and I think there's sort of a couple related concerns. I think one is just the ability to do a series of variations and say, how is this digital service going to serve people? Right. Requires an abundance of resources.
Yes.
Right. You have to triple and quadruple resources to do that, and there is no government agency. As much as people talk about the waste or whatever, there is not that, right?
Well, but this actually makes a very interesting point, which is that the amount of waste in tech companies is enormous.
Yes,
as Elon has recently talked about in terms of like the $400,000 a month in lunches or whatever.
Yeah.
That would never stand in the government.
Right.
And yet, at the same time, our skepticism of the government using funds effectively is the very reason why we don't seem to, we do fund things at a pretty high level, but we don't fund them at the same level that Silicon Valley companies do, and then therefore they don't have the time to actually explore and innovate and try things over a cycle that then produces.
It's also like the
innovation.
The mechanisms of manipulating government are essentially these days about outrage and the sort of media cycle, right? And we have there's an inside joke in our industry about messaging apps at Google, but but there is not widespread outrage of how could they have wasted, which they did, hundreds of millions of dollars over now the better part of 2 decades throwing systems away over and over and over, right? That is phenomenal waste on a scale that almost, except for the Pentagon, almost no federal agency has done, right? It is a world-class waste, right? like innovation, boundary-breaking waste. And so I think that's the thing where we're we don't have that lens. We're that's what it. You got to break some eggs. You got to make some mistakes. Fail. You got to fail often, right? And I'm just these are the same thing. And conversely, the successes where I look at the federal loan forgiveness website worked like a champ. You look at the USPS distribution of COVID tests, worked like a champ. Now I can quibble, we should have had more tests, we should have had more forgiveness, we should have all that kind of stuff. But in terms of could you go to the website, sign up, get it done?
Maybe because they learned their lesson from the bad Obamacare rollout, and it's
Well, and that was also procurement capture too, right? That wasn't there wasn't people that didn't know how to do it, because they ended up doing it with people they had. The bigger problem was you had to hire some people who were incompetent.
I'm going to reframe to get into Twitter. Congratulations, boys. We've gone a half an hour and we've not spoken about Twitter yet.
Yes!
But
the first half hour in 3 weeks.
Before I do that, I don't want to cut off the conversation if you're not satisfied with its conclusion.
I think we made the point, right?
Yeah,
I think
the shape of the problem.
Yeah. I think what your key point is that we're going through a reset.
Yeah.
And I think that's very important.
And I think it's one we haven't seen since 2002.
Right.
And it's very few of us that were there for that and still have a voice.
Because even that famous memo, batten down the hatches or whatever they said in 2008,
sky is falling.
It didn't actually happen to tech in the sense that there were layoffs, investments didn't happen that could have happened.
But somebody come out of a top school still applied at Google.
Exactly.
100%.
Okay, so my last framing of this in the list of things.
I will say, sorry, one more thing. You said that it hasn't been this way since 2002, and I got into the tech world really in 2004. So in terms of when we think about cultural generations, usually a generation is 30 years. It could be that in the tech world it's actually 10 years.
I'd say it's 5. Seriously.
I think I don't know about generations, but there is, to me, very clearly a 10-year cycle.
Yeah,
I mean,
I think
if
the
you
10-year
look
cycle.
at that sort of like
Yeah.
how lessons are learned and cohorts of people who they identify with,
Yeah.
I think there's a very
Cohorts
strong
is probably the better word than generations, I think.
And what I remember in 2002 was, and it's funny because like these sound like ancient. You're talking about AOL and Yahoo and these things, but like being somebody that like remembers that era, people stopped saying that's where I'm going to go. Like they retreated from Silicon Valley is the future and tech is where we're going to make our money. They were like, that is dead. For people who were, dismissive, but
I think that's what I'm saying there. Like
casuals.
When I think about generations, I think about how long it takes to sort of, have forgotten everything that happened in the last cycle.
The complete lack of knowledge of the generation.
So that's why when I say like I was arriving to Silicon Valley in 2004, and it was like, oh, everyone is left. Like they think this is a ghost town. Like this is not the future.
It's hard to overstate how dead it was in 2002, and even as late as 2004, when I remember you arriving on the scene. I think that part was like people were telling their kids, "Don't go do that."
Yes.
Right. And it's
it was the
hard,
contrarian thing to do.
Yeah, it's very hard for people to imagine, and also for me being like one of the nerds on the inside, we were celebrating. Oh, the suits are leaving. The Wall Street types are leaving. Now it's just left to us nerds.
Yeah, so that's why, like, if crypto is over and the suits are leaving again, and the money is leaving again,
for sure.
Then
hey, listen.
Only the pure-hearted.
When Chris Messina got to Silicon Valley in 2004, he thought it was dead. When Mark Andreessen got to Silicon Valley in 1993, he famously thought he had missed it because the PC boom was over. Okay. So in my framework of things, the narrative changing.
Yes.
Let's talk about the Elon Musk as the great business genius. And I'm not framing it that way because I'm about to argue that, oh my God, he's blowing up Twitter. Maybe we'll get there, some of us, I don't know. But that's a narrative that has existed and was extremely strong even 4 years ago. And now, say what you want about all, but like, it doesn't seem like from the beginning of, hey, I'm going to buy this company, to overpaying, to trying to get out of it, to now, it doesn't look like there was a plan. The genius of Elon Musk as the greatest businessman of his generation, is that blown up?
I think it's too soon to really tell. I really want to give, like the Twitter Elon at least 6 months. I think that what we've seen in the last month is the easiest way, I think, for me to understand it is, again, to think about the Roman roads that exist underneath many civilizations, where they came in and there was, a people who was conquered, and then a new structure was built on top of the old. Some of those roads still exist. You can see how amazing they were built. There were aqueducts, all sorts of things, but the new world order literally was built upon the old. And in this case, it really feels like Elon's modus operandi, to go Latin, is to essentially wipe out whatever the peoples are, who are living in, the town or village, and replace it with, his own, or those who are willing to stay and are willing to essentially abide by a new culture. So, to me, like, Twitter as we knew it is dead. Twitter with the genetics that were contributed by Ev Williams and Jack Dorsey, who are much softer types of leaders, I would say, and who, like Medium itself, like the company Medium, I think also has some of the same genetic, malformation. And these things survived and thrived almost in spite of themselves because of how little innovation and how much growth kind of happened over time. In the last year, a lot of people lament Twitter's stalling out, but they shipped more shit than they had in their entire existence.
Yeah, for sure.
So the fact that people sort of missed that, and the fact that that kind of happened after Jack had left the building, seems to be a little bit confusing. And so if Elon wants to come in and wipe out all the people and start building from a new foundation on top of the bones of the old thing, then I want to give him some time to demonstrate whether that can work in a social context.
This episode of the podcast is sponsored by our friends at Storyblock. Oatly
has been growing fast, especially internationally. Recently, the company outgrew its old-school content management system and needed a way to expand its global reach. After a thorough evaluation, the team at Oatly decided to use Storyblock as their next CMS. Within 2 months, they'd launched 16 global websites. Oatly's creative team loves Storyblock's visual editor, its collaboration features, and the possibility to reuse content components globally. Quote, building a new website comes with a lot of things to think about, but with Storyblock, it helps you build in the right way with SEO in mind, structured content, and really get us to rethink and consider our KPIs, end quote. That was Marcus Holmquist, digital project manager at Oatly. Oatly, Adidas, T-Mobile, and more than 92,000 other users have named Storyblock as their CMS for the future. With customers in nearly every industry and country, Storyblock helps thousands of people manage and deliver their content. Let Storyblock manage and deliver yours. Register for the free product demo or test out Storyblock for free by signing up via storyblock.com/ridehome. Go to storyblock.com/ridehome. That's Storyblock with a K at the end, .com/ridehome. My wife was thanking her lucky stars for Medcline just this morning. Remember, whether you suffer from shoulder pain, nighttime acid reflux, or GERD, or both, the Medcline patented pillow system is designed to cushion your body in a sleeping position that is supremely comfortable, doctor recommended, and clinically proven to provide effective natural acid reflux or shoulder pain relief and a better night's sleep. In fact, 95% of patients reported an overall improvement in sleep quality when using Medcline. It's not medication, it's not surgery, it's the Medcline sleep system. Medcline has been validated in 7 independent clinical trials, partnering with leaders in sleep science like the Cleveland Clinic. Medcline products are covered by FSA and HSA medical expense plans, so you can purchase a Medcline using your health savings funds. And Medcline comes with a 60-night sleep guarantee. Put an end to your nighttime discomfort, and you can rediscover a good night's sleep with Medcline. Now get 20% off when you go to medcline.com/techmeme. Get 20% off and a better night's sleep today at medcline.com/techmeme. Today, get 20% off at medcline.com/techmeme.
The best business case that could be made is that Twitter was bloated. All of tech is bloated, you could argue, in terms of overhiring and
relating to all the money.
We're talking about Google
Yeah, this is the impact of the overcapitalization.
Yes, that's right.
That's the best business case I can make.
Okay.
And obviously, people in the last 48 hours have been going on and on about, it's going to break because there's not enough people to hamsters in the wheel spinning the wheel.
Exactly.
Those two things, whatever, over here. The thing that I find unbelievable is that it is, in this day and moment, an advertising business. And every single thing that has been done, and a lot of people like to point to the political chaos or whatever, but also, if you're, again, a brand manager at General Mills, do you feel confident buying for the next 18 months at Twitter? You don't if you see this sort of, forget the politics, forget all that stuff, just, are you sure it's going to be there? And then the move towards, if this is true, and we don't know yet, that what he sees as the only way out is a subscription-based business. There's the rumors all the last 48 hours that he wants to go maybe in an adult-oriented business or something like that. Fine. But I don't think that you can get there to service the debt that we know he needs to service and to dig out of the hole that seems to be there.
So I think there's a couple things to flag. I think the first is, we do have 20 plus years of history of understanding how social networks can work, scale, and be monetized. There's a community of practice and a history, and I don't think there's anybody who would argue he has a fluency in that, right? So that's actually one of the fundamental questions he is part of a cohort that believe lack of credentials is your credential, right? And so I'm sure there are disciplines, again, the ones that, to your point, that are bloated, overbuilt, or have too much legacy, whatever, in which coming in with the brave new, fresh new thought is good. There's a really interesting thing, sort of separate from the public conversation, I think, which is he belongs to a cohort that believes, to varying degrees of sincerity, that Twitter is a political project. right? It is run a political way. It has a staff with a political agenda, and it's a destructive political agenda. It's bad for, I don't know, for capital or for America, or various versions of that story. And interestingly, very clear, even though it's been so chaotic for his tenure, he is running Twitter as a correlating political project. It's inarguable. The way he's talked about it, communicated it, made the decisions, and publicly presented it is, I have an alternate political view, and I'm going to use that to bring to bear on how I make decisions here. That's new, actually, right? And it is actually a start.
I would just push back a little bit, because Jack was very supportive of a very broad, he at least showed and I think spoke to a set of concerns from a set of people that previously weren't really in the room or in the minds of leaders for a lot of Silicon Valley tech companies, like non-white dudes, basically.
Yeah, well, there was a point, I think, where he did that.
Yeah.
But also we know that he did conspire with Musk to make the transaction happen in direct contradiction to what he told his workers, which is, to me,
I'm just saying,
indicates a shift
in terms of sure.
There was a point where that was true. Yeah. I absolutely agree.
Yeah.
So
I think that was in the tea leaves, sort of beforehand. But
I think actually it's a good point, because there was the point where Jack was talking about going to live in Africa for a year.
Yes, right.
And the response from the investor class was, we will destroy your company. Right. And so I guess he took a lesson from that.
I have a new theory that's developing that what you said about this is a political project, and I also believe that that's true for some of his investors as well, to the degree that I'm not sure that for Elon and some of these investors, either outcome is good. Like if they turn Twitter into their dream of what they think it should be, as a social network, as a platform, or if it fails trying to be that, then they have blown up something that they thought was corrosive and negative.
That's right. They blew up they blew up the enemy encampment at the worst case, and at the best case, they turned the enemy encampment into their new castle. Right. And I think the line I would draw, I think, is very similar. As you look at, if you go back 10 or certainly 20 years. The venture capital story was, we believe in great entrepreneurs and innovators, and we invest in them, and we provide the resources. And I remember, I used to be an arms dealer providing blogging tools to people, and I helped set up the blog for Mark Andreessen and Fred Wilson and that cohort of VCs. And the narrative they were very strong about, and this was a reaction to the dot-com era, was, we empower founders. This is why we ended up with the dual class shareholders, all that other stuff that happened. And you're the genius.
Well, started with Google.
Yeah. And it was actually a contrast to what had come before. And so there was a really, really strong sense of, we're just, shucks, you're geniuses. We're just the people who cut the checks, and we want to see you thrive. And there was a really clear narrative that we were never given a that era has ended announcement, right? However, you look at Andreessen Horowitz and I bet if you go to their homepage right now, you'll see the American Dynamism document, which is a political platform, right? Very, very straightforwardly. So this is what we think is good for America, and if you conform to the precepts of our political platform, then you can have our money, right? Which is, again, the opposite of the stated rhetoric of the prior generation of venture capitalists.
Have you noticed that the rhetoric among, I think Elon himself, although I haven't been following that closely, but definitely people that are cheering Elon on, which I want to be clear, I'm not saying I'm not cheering Elon on, but the people that are standing up vociferously to defend him over the last 48 hours have almost taken the tack of, great, he is destroying the bloated engineers / managerial class, the elites.
Excess elites.
Now, that is also something that is completely a 180-degree difference between the hunt for talent, the fetishization of talent that includes the engineers.
Yes.
So what we're saying is, these people are now drawing a line between the founders and the capital on one side, and the talent being the engineers and the designers and the managerial class. But for the last 15 years, Silicon Valley has not treated the engineers, the designers, as labor.
No.
They've treated them as talent.
Right.
Is that something
That's because there wasn't enough of them.
Is that something that is turning right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is, like, if you squint at this and you look at 100, 150 years ago, this just looks like union busting. You know what I mean? Like, this isn't like, oh wow, we've never seen a tycoon or a robber baron come in and tell people you aren't that valuable. Like you know, and the rhetoric from the folks who were cheering him on. And again, like, you can have whatever point of view you want, but like, if you search and replace like a Pinkerton statement from 150 years ago, it's like, that's the same shit.
In 150 years ago, it was warm bodies that could do manual labor.
Yeah.
The thing that I have been led to believe for the last 15 years is that Silicon Valley thought differently in the sense that the talent of the engineer class was so sophisticated and so unique that they're irreplaceable, that you can't just grab someone off the street and make them a good engineer. Is there? You guys would know better.
There's a magic to it. Yeah.
Is there? You guys would know better than me. Is there something that has changed in the way that startups and tech companies function that maybe people believe that now, that, hey, maybe we can run a Twitter with 300 people?
Yeah, let me tell you, yes. So the technology has changed and the attitude about what you can do to scale has changed, but also your ability to outsource, not in the social sense, but in the technical sense, to offload the some of the layers of your stack has increased. But I'll tell you a quick story, which is a great sort of argument towards that we're hitting a 20-year cycle, repeat, which is, believe it or not, even during the .com era, coders were not really valued. And so I ran Glitch until we acquired earlier this year. Glitch came out of a company called Fog Creek Software that had been around for 20 years. It was started in 2000. One of the two co-founders, the face of the company, Joel Spolsky, had a blog called Joel on Software, and it was one of the first really sort of coder-centric blogs and helped define early blogging culture. And one of the fundamental statements he made that helped elevate it to that was, you ought to take programmers and coders seriously. You ought to give them good resources. And the funny thing to think about this is it's how meager the things were that he was advocating for. You should give them a nice monitor. It should be a relatively recent computer with enough RAM and memory to be able to work. I mean, it sounds like an absurd thing to say, upgrade their Dell computer. But that was the stakes. Things were so low in estimation for these folks. And I sort of, teased him one of the most recent times we were talking. It's like, that was the most effective series of blog posts we've ever seen, because they went from, you have a bunch of nerds in the back and nobody's listening to them, and even his case of like, listening to them about their business acumen, these are smart people, to arguably the most empowered class of workers that the world has ever seen. Right? And so when you have that level of escalation in one generation, 20 years, of a set of workers, again, historically, there's a couple different ways that you sort of go and try to say, like, we're threatened by that, how do we crush it, right? And in the case of, again, go back to 150 years, like, it was a lot of concern of, if we hire people to build railways that are in this country, and that time was recent immigrants of Irish and Italian and black workers, African Americans, they were going to say, well, they're going to get too wealthy. So the reason I'm here in this country as an Indian American is the first wave of Indian and Chinese immigrants were let in to try and depress wages for the other folks who would have been building the railways. And the minute the railways are done, folks go and say, okay, close the doors and violently crush these people and don't let them form towns, right? And that's how you get Stanford University. Google Stanford. Find out about that guy. And so there's a really interesting thing of like, and that happened with the highways. So my father came to build the highways, and that's why they let him have a special visa to build the highway system. And the highways drove right through the neighborhoods of the people who they didn't want to have profiting from these networks. So like the idea that it would be different this time was like, no, this is a pretty ancient historical pattern now, decades and centuries old. And we sort of say, okay, we were complete with another era of building a network akin to highways and railways with the internet's construction. We did let in the same Indian and Chinese immigrants to do it that we did before. We had the same backlash of nativism. And what followed then is the same wave of rising authoritarianism and the political project of putting workers back in their place after they got a little too full of their britches. And I'm like, the details are going to be different. The circumstances are different. But in terms of the structure, that pattern is something where we can sort of say, does it fuzzy fit over this time? It does. And then does it look different? Well, yeah, in some meaningful ways. And the question is like, what happens after that? I think that's the sort of the big question. And like coming back to Twitter. was Twitter bloated in some ways? I'm sure. I am sure. There's no doubt about it, right? It's a company that's been around.
Most of the companies were as a result of the pandemic.
Right. And also because of the approach to how we see innovation happening. To do A/B testing, you better have enough teams to do an A and a B. Right, and also because they were getting more effective at trying new things. I think from a product standpoint, it is inarguable that Parag Agrawal was the most effective CEO that Twitter ever had, and that may be a low bar, but
Also, depending on what you're counting as success.
well, here's an example. Right, at the moment when the Silicon Valley conventional wisdom was Clubhouse is the next big thing. Twitter pivots from doing fleets, which was sort of middling and not really succeeding, to doing spaces and wins the space, crushes even like with all of Andreessen's firepower, where they have they're getting their families involved and come start a stream.
Would that be like Kayvon though? I mean, like kind of unleashing his ability to ship?
You can ascribe credit to all kinds of people, but I mean, if we're going to assign blame to CEOs, then we're going to assign credit to them too.
Yeah.
And sort of say, even if all that Parag does get out of the way to let Kayvon succeed,
it would be interesting for some listener to go back. Remember the day that I first said we can no longer make fun of Twitter not shipping products? Like, find that date and find how
many
long,
minutes?
How long after Parag took over? Right.
Okay. So, and also to be fair,
you haven't spoken at all yet about Twitter, so it's your you can run.
Okay.
You can run.
wind him up, let him go.
I guess I care less about like the Parag thing because obviously he was in and out, and he was like CTO before, and there was a project to rewrite. This is the most interesting thing probably about this Elon moment is that one of the big projects that had been holding Twitter back for years was all the technical debt that had accrued that made it impossible for them to build, ship, and launch things and do so as experiments. That work came to a close, and I don't know, I presume Jack, at least as CEO, sort of presided over that.
Yeah.
Parag was CTO, and so he oversaw maybe the implementation of it.
And they were both very involved in it, to my understanding.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it was like a major undertaking. And finally it happened. And then you did see like the dam burst, and all of a sudden they were shipping a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Now granted, they were geo-restricted, and they were doing experiments, and it was like very slow going, and it was like hard to say if they had moved like Facebook moves, where Facebook just kind of like, I mean granted Facebook does their own experimentation, but had launched things internationally and globally. If Twitter actually would have been changing as a business, because there was a lot of, for example, creator monetization things.
Right. Even Twitter Blue. I mean, Twitter Blue existed and had a good set of features, and I paid for it because I was like, these are things I want as a power user. And I had literally asked for 10 straight years, hey, I'm a power user of this platform. I know I'm not a celebrity, but I use it for my work, and there's a set of tools and I tried to do a goddamn startup to give those features, and then that got killed. And I'm like, I'll pay you for it to do the thing I was trying to do if you let me do it. And they got to like, maybe 30% of what I wanted, but they got a thing. And talking to that team, I was like, this is a smart thing to do, and I can believe you will do the other things that I would want. And that was the first time, literally in the history of Twitter, where I was like, I'm paying you for what I want out of the platform. After 15 years.
Allowing me to. So anyways, my point is that there was a lot of work that had gone on before. They finally get to the place where they're shipping things. Now Elon comes in, fires a number of people, gets them, out, gets people to swear, a loyalty oath or whatever. And the platform is actually probably in its most mature as it's ever been. And so
possibly it's most healthy in theory.
Perhaps. I mean, like, we'll see how it does with the World Cup, this weekend. But like, if it actually handles it and there's not all these hamsters running around, then there was a question. Like,
and it's just that sort of thing where, like, I think it's a strong argument that, like, when Satya Nadella stepped into Microsoft, Ballmer had kind of set up a lot of the organization for success in a way. Right? And the canonical example of that was they shipped Office on the iPad like 2 minutes after Satya stepped in and CEO. And he's like, look what I did. I mean, that's what you do. Like, you hold something to give the CEO a new chance to succeed. But and I do think there's a chance that they thread the needle on like the platform stays up because they made those investments. I think there is zero chance that there will be an intellectually honest reckoning where they say they did a good job and that's why we're still here. And that's the thing I take issue to, which is it should matter that you do the work and tell the truth in building what's next, even if you say we were bloated and inefficient in these ways. And I take the example of like what all these guys are chasing, Musk and all of them, is the kind of legacy and cultural weight that a Steve Jobs has, right? And you take Jobs coming into Apple, and I have a million quibbles and disagreements and whatever criticisms you can offer, but a couple things are clear. One, from the moment that he comes in to when he's like iCEO and they do the iMac and all that kind of stuff, he shut up, kept his head down, sort of said what's there. 2, he found the talent, right?
Yeah.
Like Johnny Ive and all those guys were there.
Johnny Ive was a backbencher that wasn't being appreciated at all in that design team. Yeah.
But that is actually, and this is a shocking thing to say about Steve Jobs, a form of humility.
Yeah,
To say, let me go and find this person and come in and do it. And also, they didn't, they threw away having 85 different models and all the different business plans and licensees and all the other crap that they did. But in terms of the tech, they were able to do it with what they had. They didn't have to be we gotta, they didn't rewrite the OS immediately. They did that over time.
But there's all those famous stories of the 4-quadrant, and we're only going to do these 4 things. We're going to simplify our product.
Clarity of vision. They did do layoffs. They did those things. But the how matters because the aspiration of this industry is that there is a rationality and a logic to it because it is software, because it is technology.
I'm sorry, when you say the how, what part of the how are you talking to?
Well, the how of how you... Musk would argue he's doing a turnaround of Twitter as a failing business.
Yeah.
Inarguably, Jobs was coming out to a turnaround of Apple as a failing business. And the how of how you do a turnaround from a social, ethical, cultural, political standpoint, in addition to the technological and business standpoint, I think it matters. It matters in what you are in the world. It matters in what the industry is.
I'm gonna push on this because I feel like there's and this is because I know you and I know your values. I don't know.
I'm glad you do.
Yeah. The thing that I'm struggling with is I don't know if there's another way in terms of what Musk is doing. I know, Kara Swisher is not happy with him, and a lot of us are disappointed in the way in which he's treating people, but I have not really seen a sort of softer, gentler way to gut a company and turn it into a pirate company. And that's what Jobs did before, and that is what Musk is doing now, and Musk has done a couple times. And that approach is almost necessary to send a very clear signal and a message. And it's not like he's killing people.
You go and then I'll push back.
Yeah, I think really quickly.
Well, let me finish my
please,
point.
Yeah.
Because the decision to come in and, like you said, to simplify what Apple was doing to a very small surface area of products, to allow teams to just focus on solving important and necessary and crucial, if not essential, problems to define what Apple would become, feels similar to the thing that Twitter now needs to do, which is that Twitter not only had become bloated in terms of people and processes, and they couldn't ship things and what have you, but in terms of what Twitter actually is, I don't know or believe that Parag actually has an opinion. He's a manager, and he's someone who will sort of put processes in place, but in terms of at least what it seems to be that Elon has, whether we agree with it or not, is for Twitter 2.0, it is a set of things, and it is many more things than it is not.
Yeah, so I disagree. And I think there's a couple reasons why. I think the first is I can fully buy into the idea that Twitter or any company that is similarly mature and been around for a while could use a simplification on the scale of what Apple did when it went back to the 4-quadrant product model. I think that's a very straightforward argument to make. One, I don't think there's any evidence that is the strategy that was laid out as a strategy for Twitter, and now they're executing on it. I think it's impossible to believe that a competent leadership team would come in and do that. I don't think that Jason Calacanis and David Sachs are sitting in a white room with a whiteboard room, a conference room, and have that kind of thing. And they're and then what we're going to do is accidentally lock some people out and maybe secretly let some people back in and beg the head of sales
Chris,
to come back.
Remember that this has been lost now. Earlier in the week, the back and forth between what the blue product was going to be and whether we're going to have official verification, and the back and forth so many times that none of us remember that. None of us remember where it's at this moment.
I don't know. And actually,
it's launching on November 29th.
Right, but more importantly, coming back from that,
I can't enter my profile.
Yeah, it broke things that weren't broken. Also, if you had that strategy, you wouldn't start with the blue check. It is nowhere near to the most broken thing that's there, right? So you started, the signifier, the tell, is you started with the thing that is important to the political context of the cohort you're in, and that is brain poisoning by being inside a bubble. The other thing I'd say is Parag was a good CEO for a number of reasons, I think. One of them was if you were going to transform this thing, even if, one, I don't know if he had a plan that he was going to do some big cut and simplification or whatever. What I do know is they did ship Blue, and it did have a consumer subscription model, and it was aligned with the most engaged users.
And what were the numbers? 200,000? It wasn't bad.
It wasn't, for a subscription business, for social media, it was phenomenal.
Yeah.
Two, He was one of the primary instigators of Blue Sky, which now since has spun out independently, and is technically pretty good. Like as an open protocol, like who knows if these things will win, but we're seeing with Mastodon's rise, where like Mastodon has signed up more users in the last 2 weeks than Twitter ever has in any 2-week period in its history. Right? Now who knows if they'll stay and whether the experience is right, all those kinds of things, like all the caveats are there. But it is inarguable. It's hard to get people to download an app and sign up for it with 0 paid installs and be ahead of Facebook Messenger in Apple's App Store,
and
even though there's 10 different clients and none of them are very good.
Especially if an app like Mastodon is as difficult as it is.
That's right. Like the experience is kind of crap. So I come back to like, and if you're going to start from first principles and build an activity pub style protocol for something like Mastodon, it would look a lot like Blue Sky. And again, Chris, you and I have spent more time tilting at this windmill than most folks in the world, and you're like, that's not bad, and that's the highest praise you can offer. That's not shitty,
not bad.
right? And so you sort of say, okay, the technical competence is there, the product direction broadly is there. Were they aggressive enough and maybe refactoring into what they're probably not, but is it within the realm of what works? It probably could be. And so you sort of say it is a non-radical version of evolving into that org. Now, could they have put pressure as a board and said you should move more quickly? Absolutely. Twitter's board is shit show, always has been, always will be. Still is, by the way, even though it doesn't have a board. And so I think that's the thing I'd sort of say is like, I don't believe it. I don't believe it is this, I'm coming in to simplify things like Jobs did when he went back to Apple.
Hold on.
Because you wouldn't start with the blue check.
Let me clarify. Like, I think the blue check is symbolic. And it is a thing that at least if you want to fuck up a lot of people's experience, it's going to tweak a lot of people and get them to pay attention and to focus. And so, like, I don't want to give him too much credit, and I recognize that it may sound like I am. However, one, it seems like the plan is to come in and like clear the deck. He bought this thing for $44 billion. He can do whatever the fuck he wants with it. It's like a car dealership, and he could, decide to sell tanks, whatever. Like, it's his now. He bought it. He can break it. So, as a first principles concept, start there. Then second, he's like, okay, let's see how fast I can actually like ship and deploy something. So let's do the blue check. I don't really like. It feels like he's sort of in this like nihilistic mode where he's just like, I'm just gonna like pull things out and see what happens and see what breaks.
Right, but that's sorry.
Hold on.
No, yeah.
Hold on. And this sets up sort of a symbolic gesture to say, this is how fast I will move, and this is how I operate in this space. So if he's just going, you disagree.
Yeah, but finish.
And I'm not saying it's right or wrong.
Yeah, I'm not saying you're right or wrong.
I'm just observing what I'm seeing.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to sort of parse this set of actions, not as though they are a sense of, like, I agree with you, there was no strategy. However, the behavior is setting a tone for how things will change. And what I don't know, if I were to go back to when Jobs came back, is how he treated people or what he said or how he got people to get out of whatever the John Scully mindset was that was causing them to behave in the way that was leading to Apple like slide sideways and to miss the opportunity. So at least in terms of coming in and like, throwing up the desk chairs and the table and making a big fucking mess and saying, all right guys, all the Legos are on the ground. What do we want to build?
That tweet storm that I read on the show yesterday, the guy said, well, give us a roadmap, give us a plan, and none of that has been communicated.
Correct.
Okay. I come back to what I said when we started this conversation on Twitter, which is, I'm coming at it from the business angle. And if I'm a bank that has given him this debt, if I'm one of the investors that ponied up to do the second half of this deal, all I care about is making Twitter a business that makes money, right? And yes, cutting some of the fat, including people, is something you would do. But not like this. The first thing you would do, the only way that this is going to work, okay, let's set aside the bots, let's set aside the harassment, all terrible things. Why was Twitter failing? Because it wasn't making money at the level that it should have, given what it is.
It's important.
Given its cultural importance.
Especially as an advertising
business. If you really cared about earning back that $44 billion, the thing to do is to make Twitter make money better. I don't now.
You could have said, like, what's the best advertising product in the world that we could make?
TikTok.
Okay, but this is my point. This is my point. I don't see. I can see the argument that some of these things and some of this, like we got to get hardcore, is a way to get there. But he's not telling anyone, including the advertisers, that he needs to keep on board to get to there, to get the runway to get to there. He's not telling the people that he is trying to get to stay on the team to allow him to build the products to get to there. Right?
Yeah, I mean, like if I came in and had the same landscape and the same mandate, first thing I do is like, there's only 4 or 5 really big ad agencies left, right? And you can call them, if you're the richest guy in the world, you can call them, and you can say, what would it take for you to make the biggest commit you've ever made to digital media purchasing? Right? And so say, I'll come out and I'll shill for you, and we'll do the tap dancing thing, and I'll get all my friends in line up. What would you want to see? What do we have to ship? And then you tell the whole company, everybody ship this thing, and this is what we're doing. And guess what? All of a sudden you're in a different place.
Now let's assume he's decided, you know what, advertising's a chump's game. I don't want to play it. I want to move towards something else, be it subscription or whatever. Okay, fine. I think that that's a mistake because you still need the cash coming in as you get there.
It's an order of operations thing.
But also, it fundamentally misunderstands what. You said this at the beginning of the conversation. People understand what can and can work in social media. Social media is not a new industry. It's 20 years old. And there is nothing subscription-based thus far that has been able to succeed at the scale required.
So let's just to steel arm this or steel man this, because I agree with what you guys are generally saying.
Yeah.
However, this is why I'm like, I'll give it 6 months before I really have a sense for what direction this is going in.
Yeah.
If this is to be the first subscription-based social media platform that people are willing to pay for, one, because most of the other stuff is shit, right? Mastodon is hard, it's confusing, decentralization is slow. So in terms of like feature evolution and all that stuff, it's very unproven, and it's
and also the cultural brand. Everybody knows the brand, all that stuff.
Right, so one, let's say that he gets some percentage of people to pay for Twitter, right? Now, if you think about what value iOS and iPhone, et cetera, devices and those customers have, being in the App Store, the fact that Apple is moving into advertising, et cetera, there is a premium, which I imagine you might be able to get for your ads if you are selling your ads to people who are already confirmed or paid or have some verification, right? So that now this is actually a more valuable cohort than other platforms that don't have verification or don't require payment. Okay, so that's one thing.
Highly engaged users are worth more for ads.
Highly engaged users, but I'm also, the other thing though is the these large CPG brands that just want to kind of like put their thing out there to whatever, and previously they were advertising to bots and all sorts of other fraudulent things or whatever. If in Elon's mind he imagines ads that are incredibly relevant, now maybe he doesn't use Instagram very much because my ads are actually pretty good, like moving to a world where people are paying to be on the platform, they're verifying their account, the ads that they're seeing, one, they've followed and opted into seeing those brands, and two, it's a matter of boosting that content to be seen by the people that you already have a relationship with. That actually is a pretty valuable advertising offering in the marketplace. It's somewhat different and unique. And then in terms of just creating like a different, I guess the question is like, what does Twitter kind of want to become? What does it turn into when it is only subscribed users that are interacting with each other? Is it a walled garden type experience that actually elevates everything? Now, the one thing that I'll say before you go, Brian, is, and again, this is where I think generationally we might be at that inflection point where it is possible to have a subscription-based social network. When we were working in Google+, we had to make it free. Because and this is actually, I think, one of the big reasons why we failed, was that every time we would do designs, we'd bring it into the execs, and they would be looking at it at these enormous monitors and displays that were fucking gorgeous in 4K that most of the people who were using Google Plus around the world and in India and everywhere else, they did not have. So our product sucked when it got to mobile, whereas exactly at that moment, Facebook was in lockdown mode, building Facebook for mobile, that became the next big computing platform because they were focused on less well-off, poor users, frankly. So if Twitter loses the poor user faction, I don't know what that actually ultimately means for advertising into the platform, because that is where a lot of activity and engagement actually comes from.
If you're a developer, you want to focus on building great products, right? Not messing around with web servers or cloud infrastructure. I'd recommend you check out Kinsta. Kinsta is building the best cloud platform for your next web project. Now offering application hosting, database hosting, and managed WordPress hosting plans all under one roof. Unlike many web hosts, Kinsta includes premium features at no extra cost in every plan. They exclusively run your project on Google Cloud Platform's best C2 machines and premium tier network. Recently migrated clients see a 30 to 200% improvement on performance speeds. You can choose from 26 data centers on 5 continents. When you host your apps and databases on Kinsta, you can use internal connections. These are faster and more secure than the external connections on many other web hosts. And you don't pay for internal bandwidth. You don't have limitations on rows or query counts. Control everything with the award-winning My Kinsta dashboard. It's an elegant control panel for all your web projects in one place. Join the nearly 25,000 companies who have switched to faster and more reliable cloud hosting. Get started now with $20 off your first month for apps and databases. Visit Kinsta.com. That's Kinsta. Kinsta.com for your next project. This podcast is brought to you by Split, the feature management and experimentation platform. What if a release was exactly how it sounded? A moment of relief, an escape from slow, painful deployments that hold back product engineers. Free your teams and your features with Split. By attaching insightful data to feature flags, Split helps you quickly deploy, measure, and learn the impact of every feature you release, which means you can turn up what works, turn off what doesn't, and give software innovation the room to run wild. Discover a better way to deliver software updates, deploy faster, iterate more frequently, and make each release more innovative than the last. With Split, you can launch new features whenever you want, but make it live to users when you're absolutely sure that it's ready. Now you can safely deliver features up to 50 times faster and exhale. Split feature management and experimentation. What a release! Reimagine software delivery. Start your free trial and create your first feature flag at split.io/techmeme. Again, that's a free trial at split.io/techmeme.
The other problem that I have, and I said on the show this week, I would never ever suggest that advertising is a noble industry. But I don't think that Elon, number one, understands advertising.
No, I don't think he does at all.
Or believes in it as a business.
Actually, sorry, I want to say one more thing here, which is
respects
that...
it.
Sure.
Or believes in it.
Yeah.
But the reason is also because Elon is the best advertiser in the world in the sense of he doesn't
need to buy ads, right?
He has 116 million followers. He doesn't pay anything.
This ties into the second point.
And so, but to finish this thought, if he imagines that brands need to become more like him in the way that they engage, so that brands are now people. Trump is an amazing brand advertiser in that sense, in that Trump is the brand, Trump is the advertiser.
Okay.
He is engaging directly to the people. That is the world in which maybe Elon wants people to move.
Yeah, but that's not where most of the dollars live.
I'm not
right?
saying
There's no
that it
insurance
is.
company
And
that's going
also-
to be like, we're going to antagonize you on social media.
But maybe that's why he hates those brands. I don't know.
That's the Elon is an 11th dimensional chess.
right. The galaxy brain argument.
Okay, look.
Which I'm willing to say is bullshit.
You and I have talked about this offline. Like, it's very clear. And again, maybe he says things like this because he is tweaking people and he is a Jedi, meme lord or whatever.
Sometimes he's a dick.
But you and I have talked offline about, I also think that he doesn't have a concept of how other people use Twitter and experience Twitter.
That's right. That's right.
And, like...
Let me build on that point.
Yeah,
so when you have 116 million followers...
Yeah.
And you tweet,
Yeah.
Not only like the level of engagement that you get,
Yeah.
but the insanity.
And by the way, you two have way bigger follower numbers. Like, I never get a bot. And I only occasionally get a troll. And I'm sure you guys get way
and
more
also,
than...
like, he doesn't get, and it actually even wouldn't matter if he did, he doesn't get people doxing his home address, threatening his kids.
They doxed his plane, but not all of us have planes. So.
Well, also, what? They're not shooting your plane down, right? You know what I mean? And the threat is not the same.
The point, though,
even if it were, he could resource it. You know what I mean?
Sure. He could scramble some jets. The point that Brian is making, though, is that the experience that Elon has, which he may extrapolate into being the experience that other people have. I don't know how many fake accounts he might have to test the service as someone who has 10 followers, 100 followers, or 10,000 followers. But
imagine that he has that level of rigor about approaching. We know he doesn't.
I know.
Right? That also doesn't matter because fundamentally, it's the 90-10 principle.
Sure.
Fundamentally, for Twitter to succeed, the 90% of people that just go on there because they want to feel like they're in the room with a celebrity, a smart person.
They want to know what's happening at the basketball
The World
game.
Cup. The reason the World Cup's going to be a big deal.
Yes.
I always talk about the soccer, Twitter. Like, I experience Arsenal games through 200 people that live in Britain.
That's right.
That I've never met.
I do too, and I don't even follow football.
Right.
Right.
So the point is that the thing from day one, his concerns about the Twitter platform were from the point of view of a power user who. Yes, power users contribute and make the platform happen, but the 90% of people that have to stay there, their experience has to be...
I think World Cup is the perfect epitomization of what his closed circle doesn't get in that war room, right? Which is very global. 80% of Twitter users are outside of North America, outside of US, I think,
That's
right?
insane.
And it is ordinary people cheering on their team, just like it's ordinary people watching an award show, just like it's ordinary people doing all these
Oscars,
things. Right?
Yes,
and I say too, I have a disproportionately large network considering I'm not a famous person, but what I get a glimpse of both because I try to use it like everybody else uses it, where I'm talking about the stuff I like, but I'm mostly reading, not posting. I'm browsing trending topics. The trending topics had been until very recently pretty good, right? So I would get, this is a musician that I like, and I'm seeing them in trending, and I know everybody's not. Because they're not that popular, but I'm going to see this thing, and that's really good. And already we're starting to see, because the moderation teams are gone, there's more spam tags and things going up. We're going to start to see more, kind of hate tags and things where they had, teams just moderating, like, that's a really hateful trend. We're going to curate
they have
that
a cultural
out.
context. They can see it as it's happening.
And if that happens and things get worse, the 90% of people go away. And the brands have already gone away because they're going to be afraid. So again, the fundamental misunderstanding of what the product is to be successful as a business, I see zero evidence.
And there's an example I really want to hit, which is where we started. There is a 20-plus year history of these things doing, and I know he's in a bubble of people like, well, that's all the people, that's all the wokes, and that's the people who don't get it, and that's right. Like, we know, and I know because they say it to me, right? And I'm like, I have a non-zero amount of knowledge here, and one example I would give you is like his starting point back in April when he was talking about content policy, which is where the conversation always starts because it's very visible to people, was anything that's legal to say you should be able to say on Twitter. And he sort of has done even a variation of that this week, right? And I always come to a very concrete, clear example, a real one, not a contrived one, which is Saudi Arabia, you can be persecuted for being gay. And there are LGBT teens there who have been outed and were persecuted for it, right? Thrown in prison, and they can potentially be executed. That speech is completely legal, both there and here, right? So in the U.S. jurisdiction as well as in their local jurisdiction. And it's wrong. It is not a thing that you should enable on your platform. And Twitter, to its great credit, one of the things they did when they turned around content moderation 5 or 6 years ago, they got really good at it. All those people who were in charge of that are gone. 100% of people with domain knowledge about that are gone. That is not galaxy brain thinking, and that is not advertiser safe, and that is not the product people want to pay for. That is not how you grow your audience. It's not how you grow your engagement. It is a bad business decision. So that's the thing where like the clarifying argument is like, and he started with a public assertion of a contradiction to the policy that was protecting those kids. And that is not a thing I made up. And so I think that's a part, and like he's not thinking about Saudi Arabia. Well, he's taking their money, but other than that, he's not thinking about them, right? And so I think that's the part we sort of have to get to, like, I love Christy sort of steelmanning the argument and being intellectually honest about like what could be their approach. I think those are the conversations they're having. I think the things I'm pointing out right now are the things they don't know to talk about. They don't know what they don't know, and the people in the room with them.
The funny thing is, like, this is almost exactly where we started when we were talking about crypto and the mistakes that crypto made.
Right.
Which is that essentially after the financial crisis, people were upset reasonably and angry about that.
Right.
They wanted to create an alternative financialization system that got rid of all the guardrails and all the things like that because, man, those other people, they really screwed things up.
Yeah.
And now we're in the exact same place where there is a belief by some set of people on the internet that think that Twitter and free speech and all the rest is imperiled, and so therefore we need to throw out the previous people who were doing it one way, recreate a new system which is a lot more inclusive and allows all sorts of speech. And what they'll find, to your point, is that there are reasons why those things were the way that they were, and there will be some big crash that eventually happens as a result of removing those guardrails, which have been finally developed and tuned.
But it won't hurt them first, and that's actually why I get strident about it. Is like I had people that saw these kids being targeted. That said they're like they know me. You're visible, and we know you know somebody at Twitter. Can you connect us to whoever can work on this? And I didn't know about the problem. Like I don't follow policy in Saudi Arabia. This wasn't something where like I'm an expert on this. I was like, I can find
this pattern also repeats in
right.
many
There's a million other communities you can point to.
Right. I mean, what's going on in Iran right now?
Right, exactly. But this was one where I was like, I can connect you to who you need to talk to, and they were able to have that impact. Mm-hmm. And so I feel that was 6 years ago, and I think about it all the time because I'm like, I'm not the API for that. Right, like I shouldn't be the point of contact for that, but that was all they had, and they were in the process of getting things right, and that capability doesn't exist anymore, and the harm will not befall Musk or anybody in the room with it.
I think this is like why I'm trying to make this point that I don't know what Elon Musk thinks Twitter is. And so if he fires everybody and he gets down to a skeleton crew of mostly engineers,
which he's headed towards,
which
he might be there right now.
Correct. And he has said and he has tweeted that he prefers creating teams of 150 engineers, and that's all he needs. And he can launch rockets, and he can build self-driving cars, and he can build a Twitter that is what. And the what is the thing. Obviously, as you guys are saying, there's no roadmap, there's no plan. We don't know what that is, but he's driving towards it, and he will give those 150 engineers a mission to go build that thing, forgetting all the other things that have been done in the meantime to build up Twitter as this sprawling, kind of very important cultural series of tubes that connects lots of conversations around the world. Mm-hmm. And I just don't know that he cares that much about all those other...
The harms. He doesn't care.
Yeah.
Because
they're not visible to him.
Well, yeah, and I think that's sort of it, is the... accountability is going to come. If you're the richest person in the world and you don't even care to be curious about the harms you're causing, history has shown accountability is going to come.
I just
I'm his best friend in the world right now, right? I don't think he thinks so, and I'm like,
but see, the problem is that he wants to move fast. He wants to feel the bleed of being on the edge of something and creating something whole cloth that is new that didn't exist before.
Yeah.
And the problem is that as you're bringing these things up, it creates these vagaries.
Yeah.
These gray areas,
complexities of the real world.
I mean, this is. I think you sent me the tweet about clocks and clouds, and it's very well stated.
This is a cloud problem,
and he wants to engineer the shit out of this clock. And that's what he knows how to do.
Yeah, and I come back to that too, because I've been an entrepreneur for a while. I've done a couple platforms that have gotten to millions of users, maybe tens of millions, but not that's not scale anymore, right? Only having raised tens of millions of dollars and had tens of millions of customers is But I come from an era when that was a big platform.
It was,
and I'm fine. I like being where I am, but I think there's a part of the industry at that level cannot conceive of there being domain knowledge from people they haven't heard of that might know what they're talking about. And so there's a big part of this is about, who's really in charge here, and where is this power dynamic? And those of us who think maybe devolve some power to your workers and to the people on your platform and share with them agency and building what you're building is not a radical concept. I am not a radical. I think that's one of the things I always come back to. Is I am a middle-aged dad who's been in the industry for 100 years. I have gray hair in my beard. I have done a bunch of companies. I've raised money. I'm not a radical. I'm a really moderate person. And if you say these basic things, you ought to take care of your workers. You ought to consider the harms about the platform you're building. The industry leaders, the tycoons, have radicalized themselves so much that you're seen as an extremist for saying these basic things that are middle of the road and always were, and are globally middle of the road too. And I think that's the thing that is the big takeaway. Twitter, whatever, it survives, it doesn't. We'll muddle through either way. But the fact that this handful of people have so radicalized themselves at the top to where I haven't changed, in that regard in 20 years. And now all of a sudden I'm an extremist for saying the same shit I was saying 20 years ago.
I just but when we go back to the purchase price of this thing and how Twitter was losing money, I guess the thing that I
Twitter
struggle
was making money. I mean, not consistently and reliably, and not.
But it has the ability to make money.
Yeah.
I'm saying something a little bit different, which
Yeah.
is, at that purchase price, which was an inflated purchase price.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
And Brian, as you've been saying, how does this thing end up making the right amount of money that it should be able to make?
It can't. It can't. The math doesn't work.
Are you saying? So sorry, you're saying that there is a ceiling to how much money Twitter could ever make?
Yes.
The only way.
He bought at the top of a platform
Okay,
that
and in
inherently
fact-
has this monetization.
The only way he can win is if 5 years from now they can take it public again at
Right.
above $100
Correct.
billion valuation.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm going to transition because
Sure.
we gotta shift
All right.
gears to bring this conversation down. But let me say this: if he does that, hats off to him, because as I said on the show this week,
Yep.
if Twitter dies, my job is infinitely harder.
As is
I
many
am
people's.
rooting for Twitter to
It's
win.
a huge cultural loss.
I'm rooting
Yeah.
for him to succeed. Hats off to him if he does it. I'll eat my hat.
I'm rooting for Twitter to succeed. I
Right.
want what it is culturally to the many communities it serves to persist.
Well, the function of Twitter is incredibly
Yeah.
Okay, this is my gear shift. I have two people with incredible knowledge in this domain. And I've said to you obliquely a couple times over the last couple weeks, but
yes.
and I haven't said on the show a lot, but why can't someone just do a straight Twitter clone right now? And you're going to give me all the reasons why this is impossible.
Yeah.
But there is, again, let me get to my Arsenal podcasts and all my soccer podcasts. All they talked about this week before the World Cup was they also talked about, shit, are we going to have to find an alternative to Twitter? There is a hunger.
Yeah.
And not just
Every
for
time I've
political
talked to
reasons.
civilians in the last 3 weeks, they've asked me about this.
Where do I go?
Yeah.
Why can you not just spin up an exact Twitter clone that does everything that Twitter did, say, 2 months ago? And why couldn't that succeed?
You can, and people are, and it's a hard problem. And there's a couple reasons why. The first thing to start with, think about when you signed up for Instagram. Did you go to the App Store, search for photo sharing app, and then evaluate all the available apps based on which had the best filters? Or did you sign up for whether one of your friends were?
Actually, I kind of did, but that's another story, and I know Chris did.
So we know you're an anti-indicator.
Yeah. Yes.
But the other billion
Other people, yes, right.
the other billion people who showed up were like, that's where my friends are, or family, or whatever.
Right.
And so this is the challenge of making the not the Twitter killer, the Twitter successor. There's a set of criteria. So first is like technologically, you do it. I actually think it's easier than ever, right? This is a little bit talking my book.
I feel like 5 or 10 people have already done it.
Yeah. I mean, exactly. Like I work at Fastly, and it's an edge platform, and I'm like, I could see people putting together. Well, because like a lot of the hard problems of when Twitter was created 15 years ago, it's like global distribution and real-time communication. You effectively have to build a decentralized architecture, even though it's a centralized service.
Yeah.
Mobile clients, like all those things. Those answers are 1 million times better than they were
Almost
15
just
years
people
ago.
it off the shelf and
yeah,
just
I mean,
white
real
label
people
it.
build. I mean, I've
Like
seen
literally, they're like GitHub repos.
Yeah.
Yes,
that
exactly.
have Twitter
Right.
clones in them.
Exactly. There's those things like
In all the languages.
This is right. This is not me like talking my book, but like working at Fastly, I see what people build there. So like the lens I have is like that is hello world. That is where you start by building. So and like will that scale to 250 million users? No. But could you get millions of users? Could you get the scale of what Mastodon has had in the last couple of weeks? 100%.
Yeah.
100%. You could do that with off the shelf stuff. And like your mobile app wouldn't be as polished, but it'd be pretty good. And also, maybe you pick green instead of blue, right? But like the trade dress wouldn't be the same. But could you duplicate the experience? Yes. Now, there's a couple things. First is you're duplicating a company that has consistently lost lots and lots of money for a long time, except for the rare cases when it's made money. So that's a scary thing to do. The second part
You're
is
just talking about the business side
right.
of it.
Okay. But then there's also a really hard part, which a lot of people who are maintaining Mastodon communities are seeing, which is, okay, how do I handle DMCA takedown requests? How do I handle global copyright?
So you're talking about the
claims?
regulations that now exist.
And not even regulations, but
let's
process
include
stuff. Right.
Let's include regulations.
Right.
And
Even if we like hand wave away, you've got a lawyer in every country in the world, right? Which is a non-trivial problem. You get to the complexities of separate from law, practice and policy. Like, what do we have to do about this? Because we talk about regulators, but you care as much about the MPAA and the RIAA as you care about regulators. And so like the complexity of that surface area, there's a community of practice of people that do trust and safety around the world. Just trust and safety, right? It's great, really incredible community, very thoughtful and sharing. Clearly, none of those people who do that are still at Twitter, and also nobody who runs Twitter knows about that stuff. So if you're doing new Twitter, you have to go from zero to fluent in that.
Wait, I want to like get some clarity on Brian's point though, because I agree with. And
then anyway, there's 10 more of those.
Yeah, you could go down that list.
Because I could also say that a lot of those people are looking for a job right now.
Yeah.
Anyway, go on.
So then you need some money. But
my specific question to you though, Brian, is like when you say clone Twitter, it implies so much.
I understand.
If we were to go back to 2006 and clone Twitter, okay, maybe.
Do you want me to be specific? Because I can't.
I will in a second.
Yeah.
Because there were several clones. There was Pounce, there was Brightkite.
Yeah.
There was any number of these that had more features, more functionality. You could import your friends, et cetera, and so forth.
Yeah.
So there was even an era, when Twitter was shit and was going down all the time.
It was part of a market.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I
right.
remember.
So there were several of these things.
I remember.
And so when you say clone Twitter and you say there's an opportunity, I want you to unpack that a little bit more, to be a little bit more like precise, both about the job to be done and whether you're thinking about this just from a product perspective, from a platform perspective, or from a business perspective.
The creators want to rebuild their followings somewhere where they can do that, where they can post and accumulate followers that will see what they post. The 90% want to follow celebrities, want to follow probably the exact same people that they're following on Twitter.
Or culture makers, if not celebrities.
Or smart guys. Like I want to follow this nuclear physicist.
Right, or a public intellectual, or an athlete,
the
or whatever.
90 great people that I've accumulated that I think know about Arsenal in the right way when a game is happening.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the fandoms, all that stuff.
The 10% of the people are nervous, are looking for a place. Maybe they're not ready to jump ship, but they're looking for a place to hedge their bets. So in the past, that ecosystem of other Twitter clones, there wasn't that incentive for those people to go. There is now, okay? And then as long as they can do the same things and replicate, and I'm talking post pictures, have replies, that's it.
The core functionality.
I do believe that they would evangelize and get a huge chunk of their followers if I'm over here now. And it might not.
It's possible.
Yeah.
So I think there's a couple.
And let me be specific. And I'm not saying that would kill Twitter, but I'm saying
it would be a competitor.
Right.
Yeah. So technologically, it's 100% doable.
Yeah.
There's no argument about that. And there are, and interestingly, because the barriers that come down on doing that stuff, there are probably thousands of people in the industry who could build a workable, be the center of a team building a workable version of that.
Right.
I think you layer around that all the other concerns I talked about, the regulatory, social, and related concerns. That is a thing that you have to invest millions of dollars in. And so you have to have some source for those millions of dollars, and you get back into the business model question, right? And part of what is interesting about why is Mastodon de facto taking place for this for some audiences, especially the folks that we talk to, is it distributes that burden, and that is actually closer to the nature of how the internet and the web were supposed to work. And so there are some advantages to that. Now there are disadvantages because you're going to have like 50 people that are managing big instances now that have never dealt with any of those problems we just listed. So I think people are underestimating how rough it's going to be if Mastodon continues to scale. Like,
wait. I want to like unpack that though, because like there's some aspects of this that I think are interesting and worth considering, and Mastodon is worth talking about because it is, one, it has a 6-year head start on anybody else. Two, it's like open source and out there. Three, there is some usage.
It's pretty good,
and it's fine. Like let's say that you get 5 or 6 there. So my understanding is that Twitter's design team has gone from 90 down to 2. So if you take those 88 designers, or some small percentage of them, and you throw them at Mastodon for, let's say, a sprint or 2, or maybe 5, some of those
weeks they could make a transformative.
Yeah, they could really like make the product like that much better. And if you've got like several $100,000 lying around and you want to give Elon the finger, maybe that would be the thing you should do. So presuming that all happens, my question to you is about the likelihood of that style of abuse given the size of these servers. Now, if you have servers that are, multi-millions of people, maybe those become targets.
Right.
But the whole aspect of an intention behind decentralization is to create more surface area than you can possibly police. This is like the neighborhood model. And so if those servers just like in Reddit forums or other contexts, create the mechanisms by which people do self-police, and the problem becomes diffuse as opposed to concentrated as it has been on Twitter and Facebook, then does that actually negate some of the concerns that you're bringing up?
It changes it, right? So we're already seeing targeted harassment of black women on Mastodon, right?
Yeah.
And by the same actors who were kicked off of Twitter for it.
But
right?
so what I don't know that we've seen yet is the hardening of Mastodon to create defenses.
Well, right, that's what I'm saying.
That might allow those servers.
There's sort of two layers. One is the practice teaching people who use Mastodon and who maintain Mastodon servers, how do all those people learn about this is about anti-pattern behavior, the bad behavior that exists, this is how you deal with it. Like, there's people, there's a new instance for journalists that stood up by a bunch of journalists. It's great, I'm glad they're doing it. And none of them have ever admin a community before, which I'm like, this is not the time or the place or the way to start.
I'm already seeing the fights and people that are
absolutely
pissed.
And they're going to hit, every red flag. It's actually funny because it parallels the crypto world in a lot of ways, where you're like, there's a reason people have been doing this for a long time. Right. Learn, but whatever, they're going to learn, or they won't. One of those. But to that point, somebody whose primary job is not maintaining online communities, this is sort of the Steve Ballmer quote. They're not just going to walk in here with the iPhone. Right? You know what I mean? But I look at this, we're like, my day job is I among other things, I lead the team that does Glitch, and it's a community for building apps, right? And we have millions of developers on the platform and many, many millions of apps. And
do you guys have a trust and safety team?
Yeah.
How big is it?
On Glitch itself, it's a handful of people. It's only one or two people, but we leverage Fastly, which can look at the entire internet.
Okay, I just want to point out, 1 to 2 people for millions of users.
Right.
Whereas in the case of
let me tell you the example though. The reason why it's only a handful, and it's also been different sizes over the years. The reason why it's a handful of people is what we did proactively to prevent harms based on knowing how networks work.
Sure.
So if you were starting a Twitter-style network, which is very open and also, to your point, if you're straight cloning Twitter, you're allowing quote tweets, you're allowing amplification, you're allowing trending topics. Yeah. Those are massive vectors for abuse. You have to have a team. We're also very pointedly English only on Glitch because we have a high degree of fluency in the way English is used globally, so we can understand what an attack is an attack.
As opposed to Facebook, which
exactly
oftentimes has no idea.
Right, exactly. They don't have staff that could speak the Rohingya language, right? And so we know what happens. And so we've been very intentional about where we do and don't scale. Also, our audience, we are a foreign audience, we're for coders, and so English isn't really a barrier globally there. Right. So anyway, but that's stuff where we did a lot of proactive work of there's audiences we chase off just by the design or the preemption. People are not thinking about Mastodon that way. Whereas the people that are running a new Mastodon server because they were excited and heady with the new days of a new platform are not here's the way we put up a barrier, because what we learned from a 20-year-old community like Metafilter was if you have this barrier on the way, you cut off certain vectors of abuse. And that community of practice, the people who are the trust and safety professionals have not had the time or the bandwidth to go and write it all down and hear what to learn. Even if they did, they wouldn't, because then the bad actors would see it. Yeah. And then the people who are running the new things are going to go headlong into the same problems and be burnt out by it. There's 90% of people that ever do this work get burnt out by it because the platforms are not designed to reduce the abuse. I mean, and in the big platforms, you deal with far worse than burnout. I mean, there's self-harm and really. So
I think this it does. It just circles me back to this question though, to Brian's point. What is the investable idea, perhaps, if that is the idea, in this realm? And I think to all the things that you're saying, I think Nilay Patel, had a really useful observation, which is that these centralized social platforms now, their product is content moderation.
Yes,
it is. The
curation and management.
It's the fancy mall versus sort of the sort of strip mall, and which experience do you want, and how much investment do you want to put into that, and that the differentiation of that experience is content moderation. So when it comes to Mastodon and understanding it as a technology, I don't think the benefit of what Mastodon offers is necessarily content moderation, in so much as it is about creating a separate space, which then you can decide to what degree you want to do the moderation and how big do you want to grow it. And I agree with you that at some point, if you scale to the right level, or if you have ambitions for having trending topics and for having a large mass of people, suddenly the gameplay of being there changes,
Yeah.
and it becomes more performance than interaction.
And this is the thing that I think is funny in the sort of Musk, contingent, where they're like, well, why are all these people that are not engineers here? It's like, because engineering is not the hard problem.
Exactly.
And,
Not anymore.
right. And sort of different from if you're doing rocket ships, it's like, oh, this
Right.
isn't rocket science. And it's like, well, nobody's trying to knock the rocket down.
Right,
When you
right.
and you're only
Yeah.
doing one rocket at a time.
Yeah.
And it's like, if you were launching 1 million rockets at once,
Yeah.
and there are
And there's
millions of people that want to
adversaries.
stop the
Yes,
rockets,
exactly. Yeah.
then you get a different problem.
Yes.
But I do think, the good news is we're in a moment of flourishing. And it does feel a little bit like the transition from Web 1.0 to Web 2.0.
We're in a moment of withering a little bit, but okay.
Well, in terms of social media, this is the most potentially vibrant moment for new exploration, new
in that
approaches.
sense.
Because
to
there
things.
are multiple players.
yes.
Right. Well, Facebook having lost the plot and gone wandered
Yes.
and be
Yeah,
at
the leaders
risk.
are sort of falling off their
And
game.
so what I look at, one of the
Yes.
things that the things that was most promising to me was looking at Matt Mullenweg and Automatic asking questions about what would Tumblr do if it was going to integrate with the Fediverse, right? Like we've never had ever.
So mind blowing.
It is like we
Think
have
about where some of our efforts started.
Exactly.
With Matt.
Right.
And with WordPress.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is stuff that, and what Chris is alluding to is like banging our heads against a wall with the same people 10 and 15 years ago
To try to solve some of these problems.
with the hope that
From
we
the
were going to
outset.
preempt these problems from arising, right? But whatever. We live and we learn. And,
Humans are good at fixing things as the thing is on fire, not, adding fire retardants.
Well, and also they have different goals at different points. But part of the reason I was optimistic about that was, one, we've never seen ever any scale social network come back. That's a really interesting thing. I would love to see
Tumblr.
Tumblr. Any community, but Tumblr I love because I knew, I knew David before Tumblr existed.
Is he still there?
He's still in orbit. I don't know what he does, but
Okay.
he cares about it.
Okay.
But the point is, I had that affinity for I'm glad this thing exists.
Sure.
Right.
Right.
And so the idea of something coming back is really interesting. The other thing is they have the trust and safety infrastructure, they have the legal infrastructure, they have the scaling infrastructure, they have all these kinds of things. So that's part of what makes me excited. It's what are the places that already have that infrastructure and then could build a network? And I think about unexpected challengers arising, right? Wikipedia or Internet Archive or other places that are doing scale content moderation, scale community management, scale legal infrastructure to which we could add social.
Again, forgive me for always coming at it from this angle, but what would stop Facebook from doing a Twitter clone? What would stop Microsoft from doing a Twitter clone?
The hardest part, which is people have to want to be at your party.
Yeah.
And nobody wants
Facebook party is kind of...
Nobody wants to party with Facebook, right? And it's the wild thing is you see it even with the metaverse stuff that they're doing.
Yeah.
They're throwing a lot of money still, even after all the downsizing and shakeout and all that stuff. They're throwing a lot of money at creators, and it's just like flop sweat, man. It's like you can just see the desperation, and you're like, nobody cool wants to be there.
The one more thing that I want to bring up before you slip, is in terms of the training that people went through during the pandemic to become better with some of these moderation tasks, I think Discord has been a really good training ground for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And to the degree that Discord and Slack have created these spaces that people have some ownership and control of, and then they kind of make these bespoke.
We taught people how to be admins.
People have been
Exactly.
educated in
That's
how
what I'm
to
saying.
do
So in
it.
terms of a non-professional class, developing
that's
those
funny.
skills.
Uh,
That's so funny.
It is the sense of in the 90s we had this, and in the early 2000s we had this, where even people that had blogs in the era of peak blogs would have I'm going to moderate my community and manage and that kind of thing, and there was folk knowledge that would come from that of well, this is you deal with this and this is, and this is what
going back to BBSs.
Exactly. And the term shadow banning came from that community practice in the early 2000s. It's funny, it's like the boogeyman for the folks who were building conspiracy theories around this stuff, but it came from or hell banning, all these different concepts came from different approaches to dealing with these things because we have decades of history in doing this. Now, the thing I say to the people I talk about this all the time is those of us who did that work then are lousy elders. We did a horrible job of passing on the practice. I think there was a lot of paranoia and also a lot of fatigue, but also that knowledge got sort of strip mined by the people that built these.
Well, there was also just sort of like
$trillion
this newness and this
platforms.
desire to build thing again, like the crypto thing. Like
Yeah.
building new and building fresh is so much more fun and so much more exciting and so much more exhilarating until you run up against the realities that the elders would have taught you. And
Yeah, it's so funny because I get this where like, so Glitch is 5 years in now,
Yeah.
and people are like, oh well, you got acquired, and what are you doing? I was like, this is what I'm doing. You know what I mean? Like, we're just getting started. Like, we're 5 years and I feel like we're doing this thing, and they're like, what are you talking about? I was like, all these communities I love took 5 years to get. You know, like even forget like Reddit, like the front page of the internet, whatever, was dead after 5 years.
Yeah.
that was the one that probably did come back.
Was coasting away at
that's true.
Condé Nast. Dig was dominant, like all that kind of stuff, and it's like the neglect of
Right.
the mainstream let it kind of evolve. And also they did a million mistakes about content moderation, a million mistakes around admins. All like, I'm not dismissing all that, but it is a valuable resource.
Both
that
Twitter and
exists.
Reddit went through that reckoning, and Facebook to some degree, in terms
Yeah.
of turning on the content moderation skill set.
Yeah,
and that didn't exist before.
And I also look at this where like part of my experience on this is informed by I was on the board of Stack Overflow from the beginning until when it
Stack Overflow.
was acquired last year. And this is the largest community of developers that's ever existed in the world. And I think it's still a top 100 website. I mean, it is a big website, right?
It's huge.
And it's mostly based around sharing accurate information with each other, which is again a radical idea.
It's basically community notes as a product.
Right. And the thing, the evolution they had to make was like, how do you make the admins and mods not be such tyrants? Right? They're kind of dicks about it, but you want them to be nicer. But like, of all the problems to have,
Yeah.
that's probably the one you want versus they're letting it be a free-for-all, or there's a bunch of Nazis answering my question about how do I write this in JavaScript, or like that kind of thing that could have arisen. And so we have examples. We have examples that have been around for years. We have examples of how to do this stuff. None of those folks have tried to be generalized social media, and for good reason, because you want to have a community that's a purpose. But that idea of there's a new flourishing, I would not have guessed. I mean, like, again, Chris, you and I had Mastodon accounts 6 years ago, right? And I was still posting, right? I was, it's like tumbleweeds and crickets, right? but it was like, you can't stop me. I don't need an audience. I just need to post. But that idea that, like, what I saw 3 weeks ago, we had a guy, Luca Hammer, went on Glitch over the weekend, built an app that lets you find your Twitter friends on Glitch. And 2 weeks straight, this has been the most popular app on Glitch out of millions and millions of apps on Glitch. And I think the last I heard from him, like 750,000 people had used it to go and find their connections on Mastodon, right? And it's like, there's so many stacked layers to what's interesting there. One is, Mastodon was just there lying dormant, waiting, like for all those nerds who were like, I'm going to do this because they hadn't gotten as burnt out as I think Chris, you and I had on the open stuff, right?
We're like cynical.
Yeah, I was like, well, honestly, I'd sort of lost faith. I was like, the open shit, I believe in it, but man, maybe that moment has passed, right? So that's one part. The other part was, I'm old-fashioned, but I still am amazed at like a person on a weekend can make a thing, and then people use it. And the only thing that had given me any hope on that, literally in the last 5 years, other than like my day job working on Glitch, was Wordle. Right at the beginning of this year, this is a really important thread to tie together. The beginning of this year, the hottest app in the world that everybody was talking about was Wordle, and it's made by one guy here in Brooklyn for his partner as an act of love. And people forget, and it's a web page. It's a web page. He made a web page, and his and his partner's like, that's a good web page. And then everybody in the world, like my mom, is texting me about Wordle, right? And it doesn't have any login, and it doesn't have any social networking, and it won. And the idea that you can make internet, and people will use it, that's the beginning of this year. And this year is going to end with, you can make internet. And this is the first time in 20 years where the beginning and the end of the story is some person made a thing, and you can use it, and it's not owned by a $1 trillion company, and you can have some agency and some control and some consent over what happens, and you will find happiness there on the other side of it. And Wordle is not going to shoot back hate at you and stress you out. And the same is true for a lot of people's experience on this sort of new flourishing social.
If you're anything like me, you have a certain tendency to put things off until the very last minute. Family Christmas lists are already circulating, but if my lifelong pattern holds, I won't get that done till week of. And while most of the time procrastination works out, the one thing in life you really can't afford to wait on is setting up term coverage life insurance. You've probably seen life insurance commercials on TV and thought, yeah, I'll look into that later. No. This isn't something you can wait on. Choose life insurance through Ladder today. Ladder is 100% digital. No doctors, no needles, no paperwork when you apply for $3 million in coverage or less. Just answer a few questions about your health in an application. You just need a few minutes and a phone or laptop to apply. Ladder's smart algorithms work in real time, so you'll find out if you're instantly approved. No hidden fees. Cancel anytime. Get a full refund if you change your mind in the first 30 days. And finally, since life insurance costs more as you age, now is the time to cross it off your list. So go to ladderlife.com/ride today to see if you're instantly approved. That's LADDER life.com/ride. Ladderlife.com/ride. Every day, billions of people around the world connect with their favorite brands online through shopping, gaming, banking, learning, and more. Every second, the internet gets more chaotic with more cyber threats. Securing entire ecosystems, clouds, apps, APIs, and users grows more complex, causing friction that slows innovation and hampers agility. With Akamai, cybersecurity becomes an engine for innovation and growth. Whether you want to achieve unmatched security with Akamai's suite of app and API protection or embrace a zero-trust architecture, Akamai can help. With Akamai's insights from the world's most distributed compute platform, they deliver unique security research on the latest attacks and trends on everything from ransomware as a service gangs like Conti, DDoS, and phishing attacks to help you protect your business. Where else can you take advantage of insights from 7 trillion DNS queries per day? Connect with Akamai's experts on how you can achieve unmatched security. To learn more about Akamai and their security research, visit their website, akamai.com. That's AKAMAI.com.
I mean, I think what'll be interesting to see, I think to tie it into, Brian, what I think you're going to bring up.
Yeah, we'll end with this, yeah.
Is whether or not that is the case, where it is individuals creating little apps, serving themselves and their own communities, and sort of like the very kind of like lowercase internet that used to be.
Yeah. A network of networks.
A network, if you will. Where, we used to write the HTML by hand.
Yeah.
And then send little links around.
Yeah.
Or will it be someone that does have funding? Will it be the person that hires all the ex-Twitterati? Will it be someone that has been at Google and, has exited or whatever? And they bring to this, ostensibly some big guns to build something that is, quite monolithic and large.
I want to say, Anil, that I love the idea that, OGs like us like to say, you can run your own server, you can run your own domain, you can run your... Right. But maybe we have taught enough people to be mods and admins.
Yeah.
That maybe...
Yeah, that might be the skill set that's actually needed.
Right. Maybe that will allow the Cambrian explosion or the...
Right.
Yeah. Okay. I want to end with this because I want to specifically thank the audience. The reason that I'm on Post is because the audience got me to number 1 on the sign-up list. And also, I want to be very clear, I'm not an investor. Gnome, if you're listening, I'm willing to be. So this is Post.news.
Yeah, I keep seeing links to it. Tell me about it.
And it is, obviously, I'd love you guys to look at it, but that wouldn't be good for an audio show. But if you can see right here, it's, so Gnome
looks very pouncy.
Was the founder of Waze. And, so it has...
We've had him on the show.
We've had him on the show, which is why, and he and I have been DMing.
I see a lot of cats, which suggests that the genetic material is familiar.
So the basis is here in terms of the likes.
Oh, we've got some micropayments in there.
And the replies. Yep. And so for example, Reuters has been on here, Politico got on here today.
Vibe feels a little bit
look, Colin got on. He didn't even need me to...
Okay, the vibe feels a little bit like Tumblr to me.
It's got a little bit of that.
You get the replies though. I can't find one with a reply as I'm scrolling down right here. But so it's a bare bones basis of what Twitter is, where there's a lot of posts of stories, a lot of posts of pictures.
Are the hashtags even linked?
Hashtags don't exist yet.
Fuck this.
Search platform doesn't exist. Yeah, exactly.
What?
You've lost Chris. You've lost Chris.
I'm out.
That's my whole thing, man.
I'm gonna have to buy it and then make it my own.
So let me tell you, Gnome's update 20 hours ago was search we don't have yet, so that's one of the biggest problems right now.
Okay, sure.
That you can't find people.
See, if he just has hashtags.
Right now, There is no personalized feed. It's just
Is it a bug or a feature?
It's a fire hose of everybody
everything.
posting. Notifications is coming, and publishers are coming. Right now, there are 500 people in as of the time that he posted this. But next week, we hope to open up much more aggressively as we release the core
he's
missing
gonna have a
functionality.
conversation with Kara. And
I'm curious why. I mean, I'm glad he's doing it, and it's cool.
Yeah.
I'm admittedly somewhat jaded about this stuff. It feels like another blogging tool, right? So if I have a Medium and a Tumblr and a WordPress,
Yes.
You haven't talked to him, right? So
Okay, so first of all, we've been DMing, and I told him, give me 30 minutes notice, day or night, come on the show and tell me what you want to do.
Cool.
Tell me what the plan is. He said, when I get my head above water.
Yeah.
I have a theory, because if you see in here, tips is part of it.
Yeah.
What
happens when you click on that button?
So everybody,
PayPal link.
when you sign up, you get 50 points, and then you can spend them. So
So
this
to
is
be
what
clear,
we-
these are points, not tokens.
these are internet points.
Yeah, these are internet points.
Yeah.
Points of the
I don't
internet.
believe it's on the blockchain.
We used to call them rep.
But this is what I want to talk to him about. My theory is that, so this is a reply that he did that I saw earlier today. Any newsroom or creator will eventually be able to set a price, a micropayment paywall, or ask for donations. 100% of the revenue goes to them. So imagine you integrate the Substack, you integrate the publishers onto the platform, allowing them to. I think that he had this idea 6 months ago, a year ago, to do this, the micropayments and the integrating of the tip jars and things like that.
Yeah.
But I would say to him, if he's listening right now, what we said 30 minutes ago, or what I said 30 minutes ago, don't worry about that right now. Spin up a functional Twitter as fast as you can, because I think people are hungry for it.
I think one of the things is like the question with any startup, any platform is what do you have to believe, right? And like, if you're talking about building a blogging tool, you're preaching to the choir. Like, I'm like, that's all they've been doing is making text boxes for 20 years, right? So plus.
So just so the audience knows, like, do you want to just say a little bit about Six Apart?
Yeah, sure. So.
What was it?
Yeah, just to sort of start my story, I started blogging in '99, and right after I was writing HTML by hand. Right after that, Blogger launched, which was the first really sort of consumerized tool, and around the same time, LiveJournal launched, which was the first social network to reach 10 million users. At that time, it was an enormous scale, and invented the technologies we still use. So I was doing that happily for a while, and then my friends made the first sort of professional blogging tool called Movable Type. And I was, the first employee and wrote the business plan. And we went from, wouldn't it be cool if we made something people could use to publish, to being the tools powering, Gawker and Huffington Post and the sort of first whole wave of, serious blogs, quote unquote serious blogs, and catalyzed that media and that, really set the stage for like the market that now WordPress, really runs and a lot of that sort of space. And eventually we acquired LiveJournal, and so it was really one platform that at its peak was probably 20 million people blogging across these different platforms. But also, the other things wrapped around it. In 2003, we built a consumer pay model explicitly so we wouldn't have to do ads, right? Because AdWords and AdSense didn't exist was one reason, but also...
I remember, this is one of the things I think, because I was poor and whatever, and I got to Silicon Valley, and like, Movable Type was like expensive.
Yeah,
and, Matt...
we got shellacked for it. People hated it.
Yeah.
And the expensive was $90. Right, like the
month or
you could buy
the software.
You would buy the software.
This is like before there were bundles and
right,
subscriptions.
and then we did a hosted service, was just Typepad, but it's basically like what WordPress is now.
Typepad,
and that was $5 a month. But the key thing about it was
mind-blowing. It's like Twitter Blue. But.
Yeah, exactly. We said $5 a month, and the key things were, well, one, it was the first. I think it was the first consumer service that uses AWS, and it was. Explicitly that we didn't want to require ads or put ads on your blog. We made a tool you could put ads on your blog and take money for it. And then we did tip jars for PayPal, right? And so, and none of this is like, I think all of this was like, all of us were talking about this, right? And Ev Williams and his team at Blogger were talking about it. We were talking about it doing Movable Type. Matt Mullenweg was taking notes. He was 18 years old then, right? So like, he sort of, it was a little while until he could do WordPress and make it into what automatics become. But there was a whole community of people talking about these things. And there is, again, 20 years of practice talking about how do you build a site and how do you put these things together and how do you enable people to publish and what are the problems you're going to encounter. And also, on LiveJournal then, the people who were leading the attacks and the harm and the raids on people are still the people animating this now, right? The bad actors are still the bad actors.
Just got older.
Yeah, and they funded other people.
I have to interject real quick. My third startup might have done a little bit of spamming as of LiveJournal as our sort of growth hack. But
thanks for that, man. Appreciate that.
This was in late 2004.
I didn't know you were my opponent, my nemesis.
Anyway.
But I mean, that's the sort of thing. Is like there was the point of learning, right?
Yeah.
Like that the antagonism of the market teaches you things where you. So like one of the reasons that Glitch has less of a burden in maintaining some of the harm, preventing some of the harms, is we just anticipated entire vectors of abuse.
Right.
And also the thing that we learned, I think one of the most instructive things, this is a really good example of the unexpected dynamics, is MovieType was really the first large-scale social media platform that allowed comments. And a couple key things. One is when we changed the size of the comments box, the length of comments changed. Right? And you think about, nowadays, the majority of photos that have ever been taken by humans are now square. And that's really only changed in the last couple of years. It's because of Instagram's defaults. Right? And the same goes where comments essentially basically had no links in them until after AdWords was released by Google. And links started to have monetary value and PageRank, and link spam started. So Google was able to inflict a cost on the entire ecosystem by not anticipating the harm of a design decision that they made. Later on, they just sort of said, well, we don't care because we've become the most successful startup in history. But at the time, they were very well-intentioned. They were sort of talking about it. And we had a techno-idealist vision that we were going to get together and be like, well, we'll just label the comment box and say links in here don't count to Google. Turns out the spammers don't really obey the let me flag I'm spamming here.
And the Blizzy input box, they'll just
exactly
push it in it.
Exactly. And so in 2004 is when that conversation happened. And we were like, oh, it turns out you can't tech your way out of a social problem or an economic problem. So we took that to heart, and Matt Mullenweg took that to heart, and David Karp, when building Tumblr, anticipated that and took that to heart, and Ev Williams took that to heart in building Medium. And so you have, many, many others, but that cohort of people, we would all sit in a room together and talk about what are the problems you're having, what are we encountering, we're all trying to enable the same thing. That's not happening. There's not community practice around this stuff. And frankly, there was also a real big lag in the degrees and timing of which everybody brought on that trust and safety team and did those things. That's the part where I get to despair and where I do get antagonistic is, how many people had to put so much time in, how many people had to suffer, how much harm had to happen for, and if all of that is going to have been worth something, the only reason why would be if we can prevent it from happening again. And to see a backslide on that makes me furious still. On the other hand, if we have a flourishing of this open internet, of that idealistic view of human scale communities with people who actually care to engage, and they might have to relearn these lessons, but they want to, and they're going to ask, hey, has anybody seen this kind of problem come up before? That makes me really idealistic and optimistic, and I'm hopeful again that, at the very least, the surface area is so reduced that you don't get the large scale, I could piss off 1 million people if I go and do this.
Yeah, I think that's the ultimate kind of question of this moment, which is, should the power that has been built up in the last decade through mass social media actually exist in human experience?
Right.
Or should we actually kind of disaggregate and decentralize and push that power back into individual communities of practice or interest or what have you, that allow you to know the 150 people who are in that community and you interact with them? Because the one thing that I see, and I had this thought when I'm thinking about post.news, with the tip jar, and I'm curious to hear your perspective on this, but it creates financialization and monetization, which is the very thing we decried when we started this conversation. And so when you bring that type of incentive into a platform, people are smart, people are savvy, people evolve, they will find a way of gaming it. And if this doesn't turn into another OnlyFans or something like that, I will be somewhat surprised, because when you are dealing with financialization within a local community where everyone kind of knows each other and there are systems that diminish bad behavior, like shame, then you might actually be able to financialize it. But when you remove shame as being a controlling factor and you're shameless, then that leads to bad behavior.
And shame only exists within a community that has a shared set of values.
Exactly.
Right? And this is what we're seeing broadly socially, right? We used to have boundaries on the American presidency that were only defined by shame.
And
right?
defiled.
And as that shared set of values.
So I guess what I'm saying is, I'm looking at this, is like, if Post.News intends to become a mass market phenomenon, then the financialization at the start will be something that is I want to go as far as to say that it'll be a corrupting influence, but I'll just say that it puts spin on the ball where the outcomes are unknown. I've seen a number of these different platforms in the crypto space and in the token space and even in the fiat space that have tried to put coins and tokens and whatever into the space, and it creates a different set of incentives that, for example, young people who are going to determine the next era of culture are going to see and gain and use in ways that are going to create different vectors of abuse that the current trust and safety teams are not even prepared for.
And Gnome, let me reiterate, get in touch, because I want to invest, and Chris and Anil have a lot of ideas, but my original idea is just do Twitter now, and that was my point. Worry about the tipping later.
I hope it's one of the folks who does it, but I'll tell you a couple things.
Yeah.
I think the first is the technological mind wants to think that every time you make a text box for people to type in, you've made the same tool, and you have not. And the motivation of a person who wants to get attention and engagement is very different from the motivation of a person that wants to make a living doing something.
Yes.
And sometimes they overlap, and some of the desires are the same, and also people have a little degree of both. But like, I have been a paid, professional magazine columnist for Wired Magazine, and I've been a person who writes a shitload of stuff for free on my blog, and I've written literally 1,000 times as much stuff on my blog and my social media as I've written for pay in my life, right? And even though there was more prestige attached to the publications that I wrote for. And so I have a really sort of clear view of the value of those different systems. And yet the experience of writing, the same keyboard, same monitor, same size box, same kind of, same vibes when I was doing the writing. And so I think that part, it's easy to conflate one for the other. And also, the social dynamics of what motivates people to share, the highest motivator over time is, do the people I care about or care to connect with, are they going to engage with me and respond to me here? Some people find that through the institution of a well-respected publication that gives them that imprimatur. Some people get that through a follower count. Some people get that through trolling somebody, all those different ways. And those dynamics are complicated and not obvious, and also very often only legible if you've done the work. And you have to have a respect for those things. And what happens is the technology reduces and flattens those things. A great example is coming all the way back to blue check marks. Blue check marks mean all of those things. You are who you say you are somebody who's affiliated with an institution, you are somebody who gets impersonated, you're somebody who needed tools to manage abuse online. Like, there's all these different reasons you might get a blue check mark on Twitter. And all those things get conflated because it was created by technologists that sort of say, like, let's put all these in that bucket. And then people on the outside come in and sort of say, one of those scenarios is really triggering to me. It really is, it makes me angry, and I want to go at it. And you sort of ignore the conflation that's happened. That thing, we're going to keep repeating that pattern if we don't break out of it. And so that's where I sort of look at, like, I hope Post wins. I hope all these different things win. But it is inarguable to me that we are at a moment of splintering again. There will never be the concentration into one or two platforms that we've had these recent years. And that splintering, I think, is good over time, and we have to figure out how to make that work.
Yeah. The one last thing that I'll say, and I suppose this is my tip to Gnome or to anybody else that wants to take Brian's money to go build another Twitter clone. And I did a TEDx talk about this. It's just that the culture of the founder tends to inform what actually happens on their platform.
Yeah.
So essentially, what happens in a space is downstream of the beliefs, the values, the ideals, and frankly, what it is that a platform is being designed in response or in reaction to. And so, I don't know what Gnome's ultimate purpose or goal is. I don't know what culture he hopes to build or instill on this place. But I would hope that, just as we've talked about content moderation as being part of the service, that culture is another aspect, another vector to consider as people are building these things. And if you bring in financialization, if you bring on retweeting or spreading or amplification, or you bring on likes or dislikes, all of those things imply a certain type of value system and the ability for people to judge or reward what people are doing on the platform. So these are the things that are the hard-won lessons. And when I was thinking about this, I was sort of thinking about that. The intention of the hashtag was to create something that was open, that was free, that didn't have anything to do with me being the person who would choose who could use it or not. And that means that people used it for both good and bad. And that is like the easiest thing for me to see. I dropped the pebble into a large ocean, and the ripples that emanated from that were caused by me. And so I think that's sort of where we are. And anyways, we'll see if there are many more pebbles dropping right now.
And like I said, there are ats, I believe, but not hashtags. So
yeah. So that pebble is not.
Okay, please allow Anil to.
All right. Well, amazing. So.
Yeah. By the way,
yes.
Before he does, because he's gonna wrap, because he's technically the host.
Right.
I'm so glad that you did that stuff at the end, because you never came on the Internet History Podcast when I was doing it. So thank you for giving us a good 10 minutes of what I would have wanted you to do on that one. So yes.
I thought you were just giving me a hard time for not coming on the show.
No, because I never asked you, as far as I know. So it's my fault.
Next one, you can go to his office.
That's
to record
right.
it too.
Listen, I can still always bring it out of retirement at any point. So anyway, thank you for doing that. Thank you for doing this. And now,
thanks
Chris,
for having me.
You.
Well, I don't have much more to say, but thanks everybody for listening. Thanks everyone for joining us. Anil, if you have anything that you would like to share, any links?
Oh yeah, I got a plug.
Some plugs, please do.
I think two things actually that are really pertinent to this. We talked a little bit about Glitch. It is a community that's amazing. It lets you go in your browser and build an app or build a website, and we're talking a lot about the old internet, but I think the thing I get most excited about is what looks forward. Is people sort of saying, like, what's the new? I want to hack on the Fediverse, and I want to do something, or I want to build.
Does Glitch have support for the Fediverse?
Yeah. On platform, I can neither confirm nor deny, but Fediverse developers love to use it. So wouldn't that be interesting?
That would be interesting.
And then the other thing I was sort of say, we got acquired by Fastly earlier this year. And Fastly is one of those. It's a sort of infrastructure company, and geeks know it, but folks don't really think about what does that mean day to day. But we've been able to. We're not even there 6 months, and we were able to launch this program called Fast Forward that is pouring resources into open source projects at every level, like programming languages, and one of the ones I love is Scratch out of MIT, which is a brilliant tool. It's how my son first learned to love coding. That thing of getting to give resources to and connect with the people who make the open internet has been like one of those bright lights for me for 20 years. It's reconnected me with God, I do love this stuff, and I can still be optimistic even when I've been so cynical or critical of the industry. I've gotten to get back into talking to people that have the purest motivations of doing the best work, and say, all right, we're going to help you deliver that, and we're going to help you build that. That's a really special thing. So those are the things that are sort of animating my days and getting to work with amazing people. So that's really my.
What's the website? What's the address?
So you go to fastly.com/forward.
Great.
So it's just fast
and
forward.
Glitch?
And Glitch is glitch.com.
Amazing. All right, that's perfect.
See you on glitch.com.
Sounds good. All right, well now, thank you everybody for listening and tuning in.
Thanks, Chris, for coming to me again.
Yes.
One of these days, I told you I might be out in January for the
Come see me in California.
Sketchfest. Yeah. All right. Thanks.
Sounds good.
I love everybody.
There you go.
Thank you.
Thanks.